Chapter 803. Okira Ryuzo sat in his office, dressed in a suit and leather shoes. His sitting posture was upright and full of tension, like a leopard leaping out of the jungle, giving off an oppressive feeling of choosing people to devour. In Ban City, especially within the industry that he was in charge of, Okira Ryuzo did indeed have the nickname Leopard Head Specialist, which was circulated in private conversations among people. One referred to his spirit, and the other referred to the old scars on his face. He did not mind this nickname, and he even intended to keep improving on this basis, because this was the medal of his many years in the field of ability users, and it was the symbol that he was most proud of. But now the posture was still there, and he looked around, but he could not find a target to exert force on. Outside his office, his subordinates were hurrying back and forth, all moving and processing all kinds of documents, preparing for the sale and handover work that was coming soon. This made him feel even more that the foundation of his career had collapsed. To be exact, it should be a sense of powerlessness. His real goal had always been there, but in the face of a behemoth like the Amaterasu cult, in the face of the extreme power of two extraordinaries, let alone an old leopard like him whose claws and teeth were blunt, even if the entire Great Marsh cult staked everything on one throw and fought with all their might, what was the point? More importantly, just the thought of this rebellious resistance made one feel uneasy. Just as he was sighing, his secretary called and asked for instructions. "Specialist, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we have received 2 quotations for the processing plant." Okira Ryuzo's attitude was strict, and his fangs and claws finally had a place to exert force. "Is it necessary to disturb me for this kind of thing?" "I'm very sorry. Taijima, you have to fulfill your due responsibility. Don't repeat this information before the deadline for the quotations." "I'm sorry, Specialist, it's my problem." Secretary Taijima was panicking and repeatedly apologized with a trembling voice, very much in line with the image of a prey being hunted. She was also struggling to explain, but one of the quotations came from Director Jiang. She and some of the factory staff jointly submitted a quotation, and we did not consider this situation. Okira Ryuzo was very surprised, and temporarily let go of the poor Secretary Taijima. After hanging up the communication, he opened the quotation and looked at it carefully. The more he looked, the more he frowned. What is she doing here? Jiang Zhong, a female scientist with a strange name, was born in the wilderness. In name, she was the technical director of the processing plant for sale, but it was just a title. Her real job was the project manager of President Song Ping's private research institute, and the 2 jobs were actually unrelated. Oh, speaking of which, that project could be considered as the Human Resources Department of the processing plant. Of course, this was just a joke. Did Madame Jiang really think that she was HR? If it weren't for the quotation sheet, Ao Ping and Rong-san wouldn't have known that Jiang Zhong had such a close relationship with the middle and basic staff in the processing plant. Judging from the labor cost of the processing plant every year, the people on the list of quotations would have to go bankrupt to gather enough money to pay for the purchase. What a charming woman! Okira Rong-san is amazed. She has not been in Osaka for many years, and even has the title of remote mentor. But how does she manage this network of interpersonal relationships? Frankly speaking, at this time, Okira Rong 3 clearly felt offended. After all, he was the person in charge of the processing plant. Anyone who was in his position would have their self-esteem hurt if they were unaware that a small circle had been created right under their noses. The problem was that he couldn't take revenge. Because Madame Jiang's other identity was that she was a close friend of the president for many years. She was the kind of close person that would make people doubt the purity of the friendship between a man and a woman. Okira Rong 3 was a little suspicious that the behavior of Jiang Zhong and the others was the president's idea. But soon he denied this idea. Not to mention that the president didn't need to do this. In terms of relationship, although Jiang Zhong had the halo of close friend, Okira Rong 3 wasn't bad either. He grew up with the president, and he was 7 or 8 years older than the latter. He had always been the president's henchman, and could be said to be the president's eyes and ears, as well as his confidant. If there really was some arrangement, there was no need to beat around the bush. Okira Rong 3 gradually sorted out his thoughts. In the end, he still had to inform the president about this matter. But now the first problem was to figure out the plans of Jiang Zhong and the other bidders. Even without considering the factor of Jiang Zhong, the middle-level backbone of the processing plant's joint quotation also reflected their serious uneasiness about the current situation. For the church, it was a bad sign that they had lost control. At least, They didn't pass the confidentiality barrier. Okira Rong 3 thought for a moment, then dialed the number according to the contact information on the quotation list. The strange number brought a wonderful feeling. He was the actual person in charge of the processing plant, but he rarely interacted with the technical director of the factory, so he didn't even have a private contact number. This lady didn't have any consciousness of working for the Great Zhe Church or the Songping family. She was like a shadow that was neither close nor distant, hidden behind the friendship with the president. When the phone was connected, Okira Rong 3 maintained a businesslike attitude, but also added some elements of politeness and respect. "Hello, Jiang Zhong, I am Okira Rong 3. Yes, I have received your quotation, and there are some details that need to be communicated." "Oh, Jiang Zhong is in the factory? That's convenient. Why don't we talk face to face? Tell everyone directly?" "Of course, we definitely have to talk, but Jiang Zhong, you are also a factory executive. You should understand that now is not a good time to talk between labor and management. It's hard for me to promise anything after all, it happens suddenly, and there are considerable uncontrollable factors." The phone communication ended in a push and pull that lacked substantive progress. In essence, this round of dialogue was beyond Okira Rong 3's expectations. He thought that this was a business or even political negotiation, but in the end, in front of him, it was clearly a union leader, and it was the hot-blooded version. Ridiculous. Didn't this woman say that she was born in the wilderness? She usually presided over such a project with a gloomy and treacherous style inside and out. How could she be so naive in doing things? Did she stay in civilized society for too long that she forgot what the wilderness looked like? Osaka was not the wilderness, but the conflict brought about by survival and faith would only be more cruel than the disorderly wilderness. This was the situation faced by the Great Zhe Church. If they couldn't bear it, they could either escape or die. Well, an irresponsible person had already escaped first, in an extremely absurd way. The explanation from the headquarters shrine. Was it really not a bad joke after drinking too much? Okira Rong 3 pulled off his tie and exhaled heavily, letting the absurdity and depression in his chest have a channel to release. At this time, Secretary Taijima called again. "Specialist? I said don't disturb me. The president is here. The submarine is parked at the inner dock." Ha! This place was only a few steps away from the inner dock. While he was in a daze, the sound of a chair being pushed and pulled and Secretary Taijima's respectful greeting came from the outside. Aohei Rongzhou hurriedly stood up, rearranged his tie, and buttoned up his suit. As soon as he finished the action, the outer door was opened after a deliberate knock. The president of the Great Zhe Church, Matsudaira Yoshio, strode in. Okira Rong 3 hurriedly came out from behind the desk, bowed his head and saluted. "President." Matsudaira Yoshio was a man in the prime of his life who was less than 50 years old. He was skinny and had a casual crew cut. His slightly sunken face was also covered with a ring of stubble. He wore a casual suit without a tie, and his collar was open. He looked a little slovenly, giving off the feeling that he was more like an entrepreneur in the technology industry than the heir of a family shrine. In short, he didn't quite match the social atmosphere in Osaka. However, Okira Rong 3 knew that this president was a meticulous and ruthless person. Otherwise, he would not have been able to quickly rise to the top in the traditional environment of Osaka where old-school politics prevailed. In the entire Great Zhe Church, only the head of the shrine and the lord were above Matsudaira Yoshio. However, those two rarely asked about worldly affairs, so as the actual controller of the Great Zhe Church, Matsudaira Yoshio basically controlled the core power of the church, which happened in recent years. Matsudaira Yoshio sat directly in the seat that originally belonged to Okira Rong 3. He stretched his body and was very relaxed. "Tonight, the TCC is holding a temporary coordination meeting. I came early, so I stopped by to have a seat." Okira Rong 3 bowed his head again. "Thank you for your hard work, President. You don't have to pay attention to these etiquettes. Sit down too." Okira Rong 3 thanked him again and sat on the guest sofa, his back still straight. His body was stiff, but his brain was working at a high speed. The TCC jumping out at this time gave people a very bad feeling. The so-called TCC referred to the Osaka Equal Trade Association. In essence, it was a coordination organization that was officially recognized by Osaka to connect legal enterprises and the gray areas such as vagrant exchanges. At present, it had basically become a platform for the organizations of the inner world in Osaka to obtain and coordinate interests. With the existence of the TCC in Osaka and the high and mighty Amaterasu Church, coupled with the numerous church organizations, the inner world's share of interests was greatly reduced. The ability user associations and the like had long been a mere figurehead. Basically, the size of the voice of the various forces in the world of Osaka could be more accurately reflected in the organizational structure of the TCC. The Great Zei Church was a member and director of the TCC, and had a certain degree of voice. However, that was only under normal circumstances. With the current situation in Osaka and the situation of the Great Zei Church, such a coordination meeting wouldn't turn into a censure meeting or something like that, right? Okira Rong III was quite worried. However, looking at Matsudaira Yoshio, this president who had only been in the position for a few years still maintained his usual demeanor. This made Okira Rong III admire him, but he also felt a little lucky. Could there be room for adjustment regarding the news about that lord? Okira Rong III's mind was filled with thousands of thoughts, but in the end, it only took a few flashes of thought. On the other side, Matsudaira Yoshio had already started talking about the progress of the mission. Okira, you did a good job in raising funds. Currently, 17 million has been received, and the follow-up. In the next 3 days, we can guarantee another 20 to 30 million. However, a large amount of funds still needs to wait for the processing plant and other assets to be processed, which will take more than a week. A week? It's possible. Really? Are you sure the Great Zei Church can still continue until then? Okira Rong III's heart surged with pessimism again. This emotion came so violently that it caused him to temporarily lose control. The question that had been coiled in his heart blurted out. President, is it really as the abbot said, that Lord left Osaka? Matsudaira Yoshio did not respond, but just looked up at him. His thin face did not fluctuate, and his eyes were very calm, but it inexplicably made people feel a chill in their hearts. Okira Rong III instantly bounced up from the sofa and bowed deeply. I'm sorry, President. I misspoke. Don't mind it, it's human nature for you to have such thoughts. Matsudaira Yoshio's voice brushed past the back of Okira Rong III's head, and his tone was no different from when he first entered the door. President. It's a pity that there is no news correction at the shrine that can cheer people up. Lord did leave Osaka. Just last night, shortly after the Amaterasu Church's operation was suspended, he resolutely escaped and took the initiative to close the channel of communication. At present, all communication is one way. If they don't take the initiative, we can't contact them. This statement was a little more detailed than the version that Okira Rong III had heard earlier, but it also brought more doubts. Okira Rong III raised his head, looking confused. But why? That's a stupid question. Matsudaira Yoshio pointed out bluntly. Since he ran away, of course, it's because he was afraid. You're surprised because he ran too fast. Although he had always known that in recent years, his president had become more and more sharp and direct, less and less like he was born in Osaka. But such sharp words that tore apart all concealment and even all dignity still made Okira Rong III, who had served the Matsudaira family all his life and worshipped that lord, speechless for a long time. His feelings were so complicated that it was difficult to describe. At this moment, Matsudaira Yoshio received a phone call and turned to communicate with the other side, which also gave Okira Rong III a chance to breathe and digest. He stood there, looking at the president behind the desk who was calmly communicating with others, and was a little dazed for a moment. The wilderness was really a place that changed people. Okira Rong III still remembered that Matsudaira Yoshio was a young man who was unwilling to be lonely and easily hot-blooded. He did a lot of stupid things, and many times he needed to clean up after him. The stupidest thing Matsudaira Yoshio did was naturally to leave the family's plan and wander alone to explore the wilderness. That was a big trouble that Okira Rong III couldn't persuade back then, nor could he handle. It was this seriously out-of-line adventure in Osaka's traditional family that changed everything. Matsudaira Yoshio finally returned safely from the wilderness. Through those years of experience, he had gained more knowledge and skills. The once hot-blooded young man seemed to have been reborn, becoming more profound and powerful day by day. But for a long time, he became a different person and was excluded from the core circle of the family. Okira Rong III suffered an even greater impact. Because of his dereliction of duty as a retainer, he wasted a long time. He struggled for many years in a frontline executive department like the Vanguard, and narrowly escaped death several times. But even so, Okira Rong III still insisted on his identity as a retainer, and stood firm in his position since he was young. For him, it didn't matter how many other changes there were. As long as Matsudaira Yoshio's trust in him remained unchanged, it was the best result. And that was the truth. Okira Rong III's perseverance paid off. After Matsudaira Yoshio took over, Okira Rong III's position within the order skyrocketed. In just a few years, he reached the position of a special director and became Matsudaira Yoshio's most trusted spokesperson. Oh my, looking back on the past, there was really a feeling that things remained the same, but people had changed. Perhaps as he grew older, similar emotions were inevitable. In the end, it was Matsudaira Yoshio who woke him up from his trance. After hanging up, Matsudaira Yoshio reported the latest news. At tonight's coordination meeting, the LCRF's commissioner will also be present. Sir. Okira Rong III was really shocked. The LCRF was the endorsement agency of the world's most powerful tycoons, the Dream Fund of Immortality. In Osaka, where old-school politics prevailed, it had an extremely strong influence. At the same time, it was also one of the biggest financial backers of the Peace Trade Association. Every year, through this channel, it took away several times the amount of investment. Usually, the LCRF was more aloof, just like a normal investment company, but as long as they were personally involved, Okira Rong III quickly recalled the interest relationship between the Dazawa Society and the LCRF. Coupled with the restrictions of the Peace Trade Association, he knew that the three parties wanted to meet, and the context of the matter seemed to become clear. Is it because of the blood vessel platform? Oh, maybe. Then our laboratory. The Peace Trade Association is just an outsourcing company. It's originally just a matter of looking at people. If the production line over there changes, it's normal for us to change. Matsudaira Yoshio's nonchalant performance made it difficult for Okira Rong III to make any further comments. After all, the blood vessel platform project was managed by the Dazawa Society, and most of it was managed by Matsudaira Yoshio's private laboratory. He didn't really understand. Speaking of private laboratories, Okira Rong III naturally thought of Technical Director Jiang Zhong. Regarding the offer, this was a good opportunity. President, I have something to report to you. It's about Ms. Zhang's offer. Offer? Behind the desk, Matsudaira Yoshio raised his eyebrows and looked straight at him. It was obvious that he was no longer in a state of nonchalance. Yes, Ms. Jiang and some middle-level and grassroots employees of the processing plant jointly proposed the intention to buy the processing plant. Occupant Rong III roughly introduced the offer and the previous simple communication. His attitude was very proper, without any personal emotions. Originally, the processing plant was destined to be sold, and it didn't matter who it fell into. In the end, the criteria to determine whether this transaction was successful were how much could be realized, and whether it could satisfy his president. As for his own likes and dislikes, it was never a problem. Matsudaira Yoshio was not Okira Rong III, but Okira Rong III was Matsudaira Yoshio. This was his belief as always, and it was also his wisdom. Then he saw his president's smile, which was rare. So that's how it is. I understand. President, maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's an anesthetic for self-redemption. She has always been naive. This was the first time Okira Rong III heard his president's evaluation of Jiang Zhong. Coincidentally, it was the same as his previous unspoken criticism. Of course, Okira Rong III wasn't naive enough to believe that the meaning of the two's words were completely the same. He quickly swept a glance at the smile on Matsudaira Yoshio's face, and he already knew what he should do. The newly purchased yacht soon welcomed its new owner, and the process was extremely smooth. The yacht went upstream from the Ohori River and advanced 20 kilometers into the depths of Beishan Lake. The yacht's functions were all normal, and the clamor of musical activities in this body of water was basically digested between the spacious water and sky. However, the journey to the next destination was much slower than expected. The problem lay with the new owner for this situation to occur. Luo Nan didn't express any opinion towards the replacement yacht, even though he hadn't had the time to modify the gentle wind layout of the lower deck living area. There was a clear difference from the previous yacht. For him, it was probably just a change of vehicle to sit and rest. Luo Nan, aside from the initial understanding of the latest situation in Ban City, placed all of his attention on the damaged monocle. Luo Nan said, "Let's first solve the current problem. then go find the corresponding materials. Then he spent a full 4 hours to repair the monocle to its original state. Moreover, he was still in the process of doing post-production tests. So Yinlu understood that the seemingly sparkling and transparent lens actually possessed an inconceivably complex structure, and an even more inconceivably complex manufacturing method. From Luo Nan's mouth, it was just an imaginary structure. It was a temporary mold that needed to consume large amounts of energy at all times. She really didn't know how harsh the requirements would be if she were to use the so-called creation method to create it. It was hard for Yinlu to guess Luo Nan's experimental plan, but she was already nervous. While Luo Nan was working, she had already made a round of phone calls with the relevant intermediaries and manufacturers of the destination. She had to understand the market and not fight an unprepared battle. Since this was a relatively professional field, Yinlu didn't know whether her efforts would ultimately be able to achieve her wishes. However, when the effort people put in overflowed, they would often obtain some benefits from other sources. As she continued to communicate in depth with the local circles of Ban City, some unexpected intelligence information, especially the parts related to the Great Marsh Order, came to light. More and more details and rumors were exposed. After organizing and analyzing the information, Yinlu felt that it was necessary to give Luo Nan another report. So she took the organized information and once again entered the living area on the lower deck of the ship. It was already nighttime. Natural lighting was no longer enough to support the illumination of the living area. The warm and harmonious lights lit up, illuminating the light-colored tatamas and the most classic wood color of the wind. The entire living area was covered in a layer of warm luster. It actually looked quite warm. It was said that this yacht belonged to the president of the Great Marsh Jusher Commune, Matsudaira Yoshio. That person was famous for being sharp and callous. His family life was a mystery, but who would have thought that he would approve of such a style? Oh, it was unexpectedly compatible with a certain someone. That certain someone was naturally Snake Tongue. This Northmont Yuahui was a curse master. She wore a traditional formal attire that matched the style of decoration in the living area. While Luo Nan was engrossed and Yinlu was busy, Snake Tongue wasn't assigned any tasks. She just stayed by Luo Nan's side. She poured tea, tidied up the layout of the cabin, and did some servant and attendant work. She actually knew quite a few things. When Yinlu arrived at the lower deck, she saw Snake Tongue kneeling in front of Luo Nan like a traditional Japanese woman from a TV series. She served him tea at a suitable temperature. Then she retreated with a kneeling posture. The room was extremely quiet. There was only the rustling of the moon-white kimono against the tatamas. It carried the rhythm and sound of life. Snake Tongue's head was lowered the entire time. From Yinli's angle, she could only see her meticulously combed jet-black hair, as well as her snow-white neck and a small portion of her back muscles under the illumination of the warm light. Even so, it was enough to make people sigh in admiration. Humans naturally lacked resistance to smooth and exquisite textures. Plus, the person before her eyes was warm and vivid. She possessed an outstanding figure and the beauty of her charm. She was nothing more than a living beauty. Yinlu wanted to extend her finger over and test the feeling. But from Yinli's perspective, the most moving aspect of Snake Tongue was that she was able to use her astonishing concentration to serve Luo Nan as he walked, sat, and laid down. She carved out those seemingly meaningless details for the sake of perfection. In terms of efficiency, there was nothing to criticize. If a company or an organization did things like this, they would be finished sooner or later. But when it came to interpersonal relationships, this method of doing things manifested a pious and pure attitude. It was as if it didn't involve any calculations. It was a matter of course and right. The essence of this method was classical, traditional, and old-fashioned. It was the morality and aesthetics that the vast majority of men yearned for. Right now, Luo Nan was sprawled on the tatamas. He was dressed like a young man that could be found anywhere on the street. But Snake Tongue's posture was clearly that of serving a noble. What era was it now? What kind of person was Snake Tongue? It was clearly impossible for her to be that type of person, but she was able to perform flawlessly. She was able to move freely and smoothly. Even though Luo Nan didn't look her in the eye, she didn't display any dismay or slackness. She didn't show any signs of acting. She didn't show any signs of impatience from beginning to end. She did her best to avoid disturbing Luo Nan's train of thought. But she was like the warm soup of a spring. She seeped in through the minuscule details. She was everywhere. Both of them were experts in serving others. Yinlu could understand how superb her methods were. She was ashamed of her inferiority. There was far too much observation and judgment involved. There might even be some high-level sensing abilities involved. She really is a terrifying woman. Yinlu sighed silently. She had placed an extraordinary amount of attention on Snake Tongue. To put it bluntly, it was because some sort of competitive crisis had turned into reality. The position of a secretary was far too easy to replace, especially a personal secretary. But then again, if one didn't care about the cost factor, what did it matter if there were one or two secretaries who could do things and were pleasing to the eye? Direct competition was stupid. It was far too normal for a person like Luo Nan to have people by his side. And the key to being dependents was that they each had a clear role. At the very least they had certain functions. The value of a secretary was to deal with problems for the boss, not to cause trouble. Yinlu was aware of this point when she became Mrs. Holder's secretary. Yinlu adjusted her breathing and took off her shoes in the outer room. She arranged them neatly and quietly walked onto the tatami. Luo Nan was still deep in thought right now. She wasn't stupid enough to disturb his train of thought. She just knelt in a corner of the room and waited silently. Of course, Snake Tongue noticed her. She quietly moved over and brewed some fragrant tea for her. She silently offered it to her. Her posture was still humble, as if she were the lowliest of maids. Yinlu suppressed the slight uneasiness in her heart and bowed in thanks. Snake Tongue's courtesy toward Luo Nan was something she couldn't bear. This sort of deliberate respect was perhaps the hidden edge of Snake Tongue. Time passed by in tranquility, second by second. Nearly 40 minutes passed by, and Luo Nan, who had been competing with a monocle floating in front of him all this time, finally let out a long sigh. Then he stretched his body. It was probably because he was more relaxed in the quiet space. He fell straight back and stretched his arms and legs properly on the tatami. His back rubbed against the tatami, and he wanted to do another roll. And at this time, Luo Nan finally broke away from his pure ego state. The true environment of his surroundings was reflected into his heart. He let out a sigh and hurriedly propped his upper body up. He was unable to conceal the childishness that had been suppressed to his bones no matter what. Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed, but he soon discovered that the other two people in the room were maintaining proper sitting postures. Their eyes were drooping and their eyebrows were lowered. They didn't speak or move. They were like two statues. Forget it. He would just pretend that they didn't see it. Luo Nan grinned and straightened his body. He pondered over what he should say. Snake Tongue, who was not far from him, walked forward on her knees. She arrived behind him and extended her hand to touch his shoulder. After a brief pause, she began to knead with a technique of appropriate weight. Luo Nan instinctively slumped his shoulders, but he didn't take the next step in the end. He turned his head to look at Snake Tongue. This Kursemancer, who was well known in the industry, was a dignified B-rank expert. Her expression was tranquil. She didn't say anything at all. She just concentrated on the tapping and kneading of her palms. It was as if everything was natural and right. Well, her technique was quite good. At least Luo Nan, who lacked experience in this field, felt quite comfortable. This was the case from his body to his mind. Luo Nan possessed the ability to pry into the desires of the human heart and control the mind and soul. But at this moment, he discovered that all of the fundamental changes didn't need external help. They all came from himself. Unknowingly, it was as if a layer of cushion had been placed in the bottom of his heart. Or perhaps it was some sort of stepping stone. He easily and skillfully stepped into a mental zone that he had never set foot in before. Perhaps he had observed and imagined from the outside before. He had a bit of unspoken yearning, but he had never experienced it with his own body like he did now. His heart was filled with a feeling that it was natural and right. The structure of the format pyramid, the authority of the closed system, and more directly, his absolute control over Snake Tongue determined the current state and structure. He could accept it. He could call a halt. But no matter what, he possessed the absolute right to choose. Calling a halt. It was quite comfortable. Why did he have to stop? A smile naturally overflowed from the corner of Luo Nan's lips. His body slightly swayed under Snake Tongue's perfect technique. His throat was tainted with a bit of a lazy rhythm. Tell me, what's the new situation? What a warm pool of living water. Yinlu maintained her lowered posture, but her mind was in a trance. Luckily, the tempo of the atmosphere in the room had completely relaxed. Her absent-mindedness wasn't obvious, and she quickly came back to her senses and responded. Sir, there's information that the Great Zay Order is hastily liquidating their assets because the dark dragon god they worship has escaped. Chapter 804. Dark Dragon God? Luo Nan blinked. What's that? This is one of the water gods in the traditional myths of Ban City. Is there a supernatural god in Sokka? I remember that after the era of distortion, the conversion rate of the various civilizations and religions was very impressive. Hiss, I can use a little more strength on my spine. Snake Tongue remained silent. She just responded with more strength. She needed to satisfy Luo Nan. At the same time, she was quietly observing Luo Nan. After all, this was the first time she had been in contact with Luo Nan for a long time in the real world. She was close to the truest image of Luo Nan. She was very different from the oppressive force of the powerful ruler of the cloud world. She needed to experience, combine, and revise. Luo Nan was able to sense the intent of this secret observation, and he let Snake Tongue do it. He enjoyed Snake Tongue's service very much, but this didn't mean that he would put on the stinky airs of a superior. If he liked it, then he liked it. If he was comfortable, then he was comfortable. Similarly, when it came to intellectual information, if he didn't know it, then he didn't know it. If he was interested, then he was interested. Under Luo Nan's lead, Yinlu unconsciously entered the role of a teacher. In any case, she had done her homework beforehand. She opened the virtual workspace and displayed the collected information. She highlighted the key points. This involves the root of the supernatural power of the church's shrines in Osaka. According to the Shinto tradition of Osaka City, the Ozawa Shrine was not the main shrine that worshipped the dark dragon god. According to them, they worshipped the dark dragon god's desolation, which they had invited from the main shrine. It represented the god's violent and brave form, probably similar to the evil doppelganger. So to be exact, the dark dragon god Desolate Soul has a different appearance and godly power from the dark dragon god in the legends. This difference is very important. Sakura City's Shinto tradition was rather complicated. Yinlu only gave a brief introduction, and that wasn't the main point. She switched the interface again, and in the virtual workspace, a comparison chart of the gods she worshipped appeared at the right time. The dark dragon god was a more traditional image of an ancient dragon of the east. There were some changes, but it was still acceptable. But the appearance of famine on the other side was more absurd. Oh, what? What shocked Luo Nan was a rather malevolent monster. Its overall silhouette looked like that of a water buffalo, but its four limbs were more like the limbs of an insect. They were sharp and twisted. Its body was crouching low, and its posture was more like that of a spider. The appearance of this famine soul is similar to the ox ghost of the ancient island chains legends. It is a type of demon. But here, demons and gods are often exchanged, so it is easy for the common people to accept it. Of course, this isn't some kind of demon. It's a type of mutant species that exists around Ban City. The mutant biologists here still name it ox demon, probably to fit in with Ban City's traditions. They are active in the coastal area of Ban City and belong to the aquatic species. However, they often follow the river to the northern mountains to hunt. Most of them come and go alone. They have a large range of activities and are very dangerous. Mutants and deities. Sounds familiar. Luo Nan felt that this part was a bit familiar. He gently shook his head under Snake Tongue's kneading as he searched through his memories. All right. Sister Yuein told me about it before. It was a series of general knowledge classes arranged by the Xia City branch shortly after he entered the inner world circle. Yuein was talking about the world order in and out of the psychic wave network. The main content was about the distribution of power between the inner world and the mortal world, as well as the series of bright and dark rules during operation. He did mention a few things about the situation in Banqing. Yinlu stopped. Then. Keep talking. Keep talking. Especially about the mutual achievement between mutants and deities. It should be this. I've pretty much forgotten about it. Yes. Yinlu took a deep breath. She made slight adjustments according to Luo Nan's demarcated scope and continued her explanation. The background of the so-called mutual achievement is this. After the arrival of the era of mutants, Banqing was built upon the ruins. It became the only large-scale city on the archipelago, and it basically inherited the culture of the archipelago. However, a few years before the appearance of supernatural powers, the tradition of the divine path didn't seem to possess the soil to produce mortal powers. This continued until a certain ability user who came from a traditional shrine and possessed an extreme factor of madness did an inconceivable experiment. Of course, it was possible that his mind had suddenly gone insane. He used the god sacrifice ritual to directly connect his own deity with a powerful mutant that was wreaking havoc around the archipelago at the time. He prostrated himself in worship. And the connection was truly realized. He received feedback, forming a sort of symbiotic relationship. Because of this, many of the secular clergy members of that shrine became ability users in a single leap. No matter how absurd the cause was, in the end, it opened a door to the extraordinary level for the traditional power of the divine path in Banqing. Admittedly, the era of mutants was a place where demons danced wildly, but it was more in line with the tradition of the divine path, which had always had faith in animism. Mountains, rocks, plants, birds, beasts, and even the resentment of souls could all become spirits and monsters. There was a foundation for the masses. There was a foundation of faith from over 100 million people. There was substantial feedback from supernatural powers. It was reasonable for this system to grow larger and stronger. Thus, the surrounding orders of Banqing flourished greatly. All kinds of shrines were erected in great numbers, becoming the famous city of myriad gods. Luo Nen nodded his head over and over as he listened. Now I remember. Mutant birds, beasts, plants and trees were used as deities. They should be used as the sustenance of a specific collection of imagination. If the mental plane possesses the rule of configuration, then there are mutants possessing supernatural powers as platforms and carriers. It is possible to realize a leap from 0 to 1. Therefore, as long as the basic conditions are met, the forms of supernatural powers are very flexible. Mr. is right. Lu agreed and continued speaking. It's just that the system of the divine path of Banqing also has an enormous flaw. Those so-called gods were still aberrations at the root. Most of them have yet to be rid of their wild nature. Some are muddle-headed, while others are sinister and savage. It isn't easy to consecrate them and use them for a long period of time. Some small orders, such as the Temo Shrine, often suffer backlash because of this. Their system collapses. The shrine that was the first to eat crabs has long since been annihilated and forgotten. Although there are many orders in Banqing, only the Amaterasu order has truly become popular. It isn't the traditional path of the divine path. Luo Nen laughed. The Blood Flame order was an ideal order. They had their own sense of superiority. It was normal for them to not be used to the wild zen of Banqing. The three great secret orders, the Order of Justice, the Amaterasu order, and the Eye of Secret Contract, had never given their position of deity to others. The Order of Justice was considered the most special. They possessed the factor of worshipping holy objects, but they also carried out the concept of complete logic. They used pure rules as a key link, and they possessed the ability to materialize. Creating something out of nothing seemed illusory, but it was actually the most stable. Luo Nen suddenly thought of something. He turned his head and smiled at Snake Tongue. Your myriad spirit order is too casual. Their sacrificial rites and incantations are all over the place. They lack sincerity. I've made a fool of myself in front of my lord. Snake Tongue was calm. Although she was born in Banqing, a lineage of the divine path that could be called pure law, her natural disposition was callous. She didn't have any protective heart. She just used Banqing as a bunker, and the myriad spirit order was the outer cover of the bunker. It was fine as long as it had an appearance. If she had 1/10 of the concentration she spent on the massage today, the myriad spirit order would have a different appearance. Luo Nan was just speaking without thinking. He indicated for Lu to continue explaining. Lu changed the page of the virtual work area, focusing once more on the Great Zay Order. The Great Zay Order is quite mature compared to the other mediocre Temo Shrine. It is said that the dark dragon god wilderness soul they consecrate, the Great Zay Order, has gradually grown in wisdom over the past few decades. Its spirituality is quite high, and it can even communicate with people. But it is precisely because of this that its reactions are more uncertain. According to the information, I have basically reconstructed the situation from last night. Here is an example that is more tragic than the Great Zay Order. There is a Honda shrine to the west of Banqing. It belongs to the Temo shrine, a branch of a branch. It mainly consecrates the leech child god and its soul. Its influence is small. It is this leech child god's avatar that was hijacked by the Amaterasu order last night. The entire order system collapsed in an instant, and 3 priests of various levels died on the spot. This is the first confirmed victim of the Amaterasu order's operation this time. But basically no one has mentioned it. The 2 shrines of Honda and Great Zay have always been publicly recognized as having a close relationship. It is extremely likely that the Dark Dragon God Wilderness Soul was frightened by the unforeseen event at Honda Shrine. It left Banqing far away, and no one knows where it fled to. Luo Nan furrowed his brows. So the Great Zay Order sold off a large amount of assets to flee with their own god. Is there something wrong with this? Yes. I feel that this decision was made too hastily. Inla focused the information page on a certain man who looked very casual and confident. The number 2 figure of the Great Zay Order is Matsudaira Yoshio, who currently presides over the affairs of the order. It is said that he is a very shrewd person. He has been doing very well in Banqing these past few years. It is hard to imagine that he would sell off his assets in such a hurry. But it is also possible that he received other information. We need further information to support this. Luo Nan shook his head. The Great Zay Order was just a small detail in the overall situation of Banqing. He paid more attention to the situation of the Amaterasu Order. So what if they are from other orders and shrines? The Honda Shrine and the Great Zay Order are already in this state. Don't they have the slightest bit of sympathy? Can they still hold on? The Dark Dragon God ran away. So what if there are other so-called gods? A voice suddenly interrupted Yin Lu as she was preparing her words. There won't be any changes. Snake Tongue just happened to pinch the back of Luo Nan's neck. She moved closer and spoke in a soft voice. Her warm breath was extremely pleasant. Luo Nan's neck turned slightly along with the moderate strength of her fingers. He asked without thinking, why? The orders and shrines of Banqing have long since gotten used to living under the control of the Amaterasu order. It's just like how the common people are used to making a living under the shadow of a giant corporation. Some people are muddle-headed. Some people have some experiences, but they aren't willing to think deeply about it. Some people have thoughts of struggling, but they don't have the strength to struggle. Under such a general trend, 99% of the people will maintain their established path and complete the role they were given. This is tradition. This is also the basic rule of living within. Even if they are destined to be dealt with tomorrow, they will still have to compare the result of being dealt with and the result of violating the rules. Which one is more miserable? In the end, most of their choices will still be carried out according to the established rules. Her warm voice and soft words revealed a sense of coolness and indifference. It made Luo Nan raise his eyebrows. They can't even muster the thought of resisting? Why would they resist? Snake Tongue laughed softly. The appearance of the god path of Banqing can deceive ordinary people. But who doesn't know what's going on when it comes to ability users? The various orders and shrines can only use the name of one spirit 4 souls to cover up and deceive themselves. It can be said that the tradition of the god path has already become a deformed monster after entering the age of distortion. For the sake of obtaining supernatural strength, people think of every way possible to support and please those ignorant and violent mutants. These rules themselves don't possess the value of maintaining them. For many people, the Amaterasu Order's nation of gods is more interesting than the tradition of the god path that has gone astray. Nation of gods? Luo Nan heard a new term and asked subconsciously. Snake Tongue seemed to believe that she had already said too much as a maid. She smiled slightly and her gaze shifted to Yin Lu. Yin Lu received this favor with a smile. Of course, everything was built on the foundation of doing her homework. She flipped to a new page of information and displayed a tree diagram. The Amaterasu Order has been promoting the so-called Nation of Divine Treasures for the past few years. They say that the Fusang Divine Tree, constructed by true gods, has 10 parallel suns, each divine treasure. Each divine treasure is a world, and each world is the dwelling place of the gods. Aside from the supreme gods, there are also clones, souls, and auxiliary gods that reside there. Their ranks are clearly distinguished. Luo Nan instantly understood. These seats are all reserved for the shrines of the orders of Banqing. Exactly. In recent years, the Amaterasu order has viewed Banqing more and more as a forbidden land. Perhaps they want to establish a nation of god system on the foundation of the city of myriad gods. It is similar to the tradition of the god path of Banqing, but it is actually different. It is very much in line with the cultural traditions here. As for what will happen after harvesting these mutant gods, it is hard to guess right now. Snake Tongue's fingertips streaked across the back of Luo Nan's neck. She continued to speak softly and slowly. She added, "There is no need for a reason under power. But if there really is one, then the people of Banqing will be quite satisfied." So it's like this. Luo Nan responded with a single sound. Then he narrowed his eyes and spoke no more. It seemed that he was pondering, but it also seemed that he was simply enjoying Snake Tongue's technique. His mind was absent-minded, and he didn't know where to go. This period of silence lasted for an especially long time. Normally, Yin Li's mental fortitude was lacking. However, Snake Tongue was present before her eyes. She more or less had a competitive streak in her heart. She saw that Snake Tongue was humble and calm when she accompanied Luo Nan. Yin Li didn't want to fall behind. She secretly learned from Snake Tongue, and out of nowhere, she gained a tranquil air. She endured through the most unbearable period of time. The cabin returned to silence. Only the soft sound of the ripples of the ship traveling at low speeds could be faintly heard. It gave the warm cabin a layer of coolness. Nearly 40 minutes had passed by the time Luo Nan opened his mouth again. He let out a sigh of emotion. Banqing doesn't have the psychic wave network, but the overall structure of the mental domain is quite lively. Sure enough, each place has its own custom. Yin Li's somewhat stiff mind suddenly woke up. "Sir, are you referring to?" "I'm talking about the surrounding environment of the mental sea. You've listened to my lessons, right?" "Yes." "The madam has requested that everyone in the order from top to bottom repeatedly research and study it." "Ha ha ha, there's no need to be so exaggerated." Luo Nan's body and mental state grew more and more relaxed under Snake Tongue's exquisite technique. He laughed and waved his hand. "It's fine as long as you know a few words that I forcefully named. I'm talking about Banqing. Normally, the mental sea is chaotic and orderly. As the cage bubbles are born and extinguished, there is a relatively clear trend. It gathers towards a few relatively solid existences. Some of the gatherings are arranged in a very orderly manner, layer upon layer of accumulation and operation. Some are done especially well. They make full use of the accumulation of believers. Even those who don't have the qualifications to enter the Overlook Abyss district can make contact and probe in, using some of the power there. This is the meaning behind the existence of a large number of orders and shrines. Looking purely from the usage of supernatural powers, the atmosphere here is actually better than that of Xia City. It's more efficient, and it has more configurational thinking. However, it's a lot less independent. It's all the same. There aren't too many surprises. It lacks the power of barbaric growth. It's like something in a petri dish. Yeah, if you zoom in a bit more, it's like a greenhouse. This must be the most authoritative review from the perspective of configuration, right? Yin Li memorized these words in her heart. She pondered a few times, and she suddenly realized something. "Sir, are you saying that there are people deliberately guiding and cultivating here? Is it the Amaterasu order? But they've only been established for 20 to 30 years. The deformities of the divine path and the mutual achievement of each other happened even earlier. It doesn't matter who planted them. They're harvesting them anyway. No, it's like the ingredients for the meal have already been prepared and put into the pot. They can be done right away. But someone interferes midway. Let's not even talk about the operation being halted. The duck that was about to enter the mouth has flown away. TSK. It seems like I'm the reason? Ha! The Luo family's sandwich domain. It doesn't seem easy to explain. In short, it's a continuous effect caused by the interference of space and time. If the Amaterasu order has really delayed their operation because of the turbulence of space and time, then I'm most likely involved. If they catch me, I'm afraid they'll fight me to the death." Amidst Luo Nan's loud laughter, Snake Tongue's kneading motion paused for a moment. Yin Li cast her gaze over, but she didn't dare to linger on Luo Nan's face. She just met Snake Tongue's gaze, and she looked away at the same time. At this moment, Li's heartbeat sped up. It was as if there was a line of sight shining over from the Amaterasu Pure Land in the outer seas of Ban City. No matter what the situation was, going against extraordinaries would never make things easy for them. However, Li recalled the miraculous movie viewing experience she had a few days ago. The extremely close angle of view caused her to have a sort of misconception. Actually, I've done it with extraordinaries a long time ago. Her taut mind suddenly relaxed. She raised her head and saw Snake Tongue calmly and peacefully continuing her massage. What a shrewd woman. Li didn't want to fall behind. At the very least, she couldn't lose to Snake Tongue. She controlled her emotions, and her train of thought gradually became clear. She took the initiative to open her mouth and ask. Mr. Luo said in his lecture that contact is invasion in the sea of consciousness. We don't dare to make wild guesses about Mr. Luo's realm. However, Ban City is the headquarters of the Amaterasu Order. Can the mental senses of those two extraordinaries probe and search? It's basically impossible right now because it's chaotic enough. Luo Nan twisted his neck, but it caused the muscles and bones of the lower half of his body to make faint sounds. His muscles, bones, and skin constantly adjusted their positions and states, gradually matching the changes of the Luo clan's sandwich domain. Speaking of which, Snake Tongue's massage technique was truly brilliant. After a new round of imbalance between body and soul, it was quite rare to see such smooth fine adjustments that didn't require extra effort. It was as if something that had always been missing had been filled up. A distorted link had been unraveled, even if it was only a temporary phenomenon. Soon, the chaos in the overall structure of the domain masked these changes. Luo Nan's sandwich domain was in a state of conflict and interference at all times. In terms of degree, it was far more serious than when he was bedridden due to a serious illness. It was just that he already understood the technique of diverting disaster. Plus, his foundation was solid, and the expanded space of his domain was sufficiently vast. The layered laws were complex and flexible. Only then did he have the leeway to buffer the changes. He didn't dig himself in. Right now, it was quite difficult to completely straighten things out. He had to expend a great deal of energy to adjust dynamically from time to time. If someone from the outside came over, they would probably be taken into outer space by the chaotic structure of space and time. It was no wonder that the Amaterasu Order wanted to stop. The space-time environment of Ban City, the environment of the Mental Sea, and the environment of the Abyss region weren't obvious on the whole. But Luo Nan had messed up the details, causing the variables to increase dramatically. No one wanted to suddenly cut off the fire and air while they were cooking soup. Then a cockroach would jump out of nowhere. Under normal circumstances, even if there were 10 extraordinaries gathered together, this sort of situation wouldn't occur. From the standpoint of the Amaterasu Order, Luo Nan would certainly suspect that someone was purposely causing trouble. It really wasn't on purpose. I can't return to Xia City for some time before I take care of this. Otherwise, I'll be confessing without being pressed. This is a headache. Luo Nan had yet to find a new and relatively stable body and soul coupling mode. This interference effect of messing up the state of space and time would not disappear. From this perspective, it would be good if the Amaterasu Order could find him. He could communicate with them and sort out the messy structure clearly. The more Luo Nan thought about it, the more absurd it became. He unconsciously laughed. The more he relaxed, the more Li reflected. I've been acting in a high-profile manner in Ban City these past few days. It's a bit inappropriate. My identity and financial channels can't be hidden from people with intentions. With the current sensitivity of the Amaterasu Order, if I follow the clues, I'll be able to find some clues about my whereabouts. Also, there are many people in the market we're going to. Shouldn't we? It doesn't matter. You're here. You have a completely unrelated relationship. They won't think of me. Luo Nan looked at Snake Tongue. Look, this is a good example. We can learn from it. Snake Tongue's wide sleeves hung down. She used her palms to exert force on Luo Nan's shoulder blade. Most of her body stuck to Luo Nan. She looked quite forceful, but her breath was light. It was gentle and drawn out. Even her voice was soft and sweet-sounding. It's nothing more than a plot made by relying on the yarn of concealment. It's just a small trick. It can't enter your discerning eyes. But right now you need to deceive people. Why don't you take this object? What a pretentious fox. Yin Li's eyes drooped as she cursed silently. Then she heard Luo Nan respond with a careless tone. There's no need. But I can study it and learn from it. After coming back, the only thing worth analyzing with the lens is the 2 scarves you're wearing. Oh, you still haven't connected them together? I've tried a few times. The 2 seem to be made by nature. I can't find a place to start. That's normal. I've done a rough study before. The structure of these 2 scarves is special. The materials are special. The manufacturing method is special as well. It's a strange object that truly possesses the level of creation. Luo Nan naturally compared the equipment on his body. The biochemical reactor that he had just snatched a few days ago was a defective product. Its functions were different as well. It was hard to make a direct comparison, but from the blueprints stored in the virtual brain system, Luo Nan could tell that Luo Nan's technology was robust and that the manufacturing was precise. Luo Nan's ingenious design seemed to be inferior in some aspects. The divine binding hoop he obtained from Jin Tong was roughly at this level as well. Only the external neuron, which carried the virtual brain system, was a notch higher in terms of unpredictability. Of course, this was just the opinion of a rookie who had just begun learning creation. He needed to conduct in-depth research before he could come to a conclusion. His thoughts reached this point, and the monocle appeared out of thin air. It stuck to Luo Nan's left eye. Actually, this wasn't a necessary step to use it, but didn't life need a bit of a sense of ritual? Specific small movements could help the user carry out psychological suggestions, allowing them to concentrate their mind more effectively. At the same time, it could also affect the target. Just like Snake Tongue right now. Due to Luo Nan's direct gaze and the influence of the refracted light, her phantom image was reflected on the lens of the monocle. It interweaved with the color of Luo Nan's pupils, forming a treacherous silhouette of light and shadow. There was clearly an unexplainable and irresistible power swirling within. Snake Tongue wanted to lower her head and avoid Luo Nan's gaze completely out of instinct. But in the next second, her lower jaw tightened slightly. Luo Nan had actually pinched it with his fingers. She was unable to lower it by even a bit. Then there was a force that stretched forward. Snake Tongue subconsciously let out a light cry. She was forced to raise her chin and move a few centimeters forward on her knees. The production of this movement was very abrupt, but it was also very normal. The distance between the 2 was very close, but one was in front and one was behind. Luo Nan needed to turn his head to look. The angle wasn't comfortable, so he naturally had to adjust after pinching Snake Tongue's chin. Fortunately, Snake Tongue's body was soft. She was like a beautiful snake wrapped in a kimono. She stuck to Luo Nan's back, arms and knees, twisting over bit by bit. Her arms were barely able to support herself on the tatami, and she maintained a kneeling posture. Finally, she faced Luo Nan face to face. The distance between the 2 grew even closer. It was so close that it was extremely ambiguous for a man and a woman. Luo Nan should feel uncomfortable. At least, he thought he would feel like this. Thought. It was this thought that proved that Luo Nan's current state of mind was different from before. In the past, Luo Nan's mind was basically free of distracting thoughts when he was conducting research and exploration. 1 was 1. 2 was 2. There was no room for other elements to intervene. But this time, his mind wasn't too pure. Snake Tongue's humble and intimate movements caused subtle changes in his mind. This continued for several dozen minutes. Luo Nan believed that he had gotten used to it, but a slight change in angle was actually able to bring about a whole new level of stimulation. A single excessive movement or even thought brought about a chain reaction. Luo Nan didn't have any decent analysis in his mind for a short period of time after Snake Tongue finished adjusting her posture. Instead, he received daily information from Xie Junping and his group of bad friends, which was exclusive to men, and it surged into his mind. It could be said without hiding anything that Luo Nan had similar thoughts in the past when he faced Cat Eyes, Zhang Yingying, and even He Yueyin. It was just that this was a normal physiological and psychological reaction. As long as he considered their friendship and mutual respect, he wouldn't think further down the line. If he had a sense of morality, a sense of shame or something like that, then perhaps it would be useful. But Snake Tongue was different. She had a completely subdued posture. She used to be his enemy. She had an irreversible difference in status within the system. Luo Nan had never come into contact with the opposite sex in reality. Moreover, he didn't feel any pressure to communicate with her, so there was a subtle feeling of unreality. She was clearly a lively and fragrant woman, but she was like a character in a movie or a character in a game. She conformed to the aesthetic, but she didn't conform to the psychological reality. However, Snake Tongue was real. His fingers were still pinching Snake Tongue's lower jaw. There were a few minute movements as he gently stroked her smooth skin, experiencing the texture and contours of her skin and bones. There were some false elements of the effects of the muslin of concealment, but this wasn't the main point. The main point was that this method directly probed into the depths of Snake Tongue's heart. There was also the subtle feedback. Luo Nan was able to capture Snake Tongue's immediate psychological reaction. She was subdued, humble, and a deeper layer of fear and awareness. All of this was mixed together under her docile attitude. From beginning to end, it was as if she was a dense warm mist of water vapor. She silently endured everything, and she naturally dispelled the necessary reaction force. It doesn't matter what I do, she won't refuse. Yin Lu won't stop me. Right now, she was in a very awkward situation. She was in a dilemma. She and the others have considered the problems and made preparations far more than I have. Luo Nan had always been a sharp person. He just didn't ponder deeper into things. He didn't waste his thoughts and energy. But right now, there were some thoughts and thoughts deep within his heart. They were like a primeval forest after a heavy rain. Plants and vines wildly grew and spread. Right now, Luo Nan didn't know what kind of expression he should display. The collapse of his mental barriers combined with his shallow experience allowed his face to maintain a tranquil or wooden state. He completely obliterated the uneasiness from his new experiences. His thoughts dominated everything as if it were a matter of course. Emotions and thoughts cause changes in the body. Perhaps it would be more accurate to reverse the cause and effect relationship. Luo Nan had the ability to sense the more detailed things within his body, but he no longer had the mind to delve into them. He just felt strange and a bit awkward. But he felt more comfortable. Extremely comfortable. Whether it was the rise and fall of his blood energy or the circulation of his thoughts, everything was free and smooth. He really liked this state. Of course he liked it a lot. Next. Luo Nan's finger was about to move down, but he had already let his fingertips streak across the tender flesh under Snake Tongue's lower jaw, moving down along her neck. Snake Tongue's lower jaw didn't have the strength to support it, but she still maintained her original posture. She didn't move at all, allowing her fragile and slender neck to be exposed. It was a posture that defied the instincts of living creatures. It was as if she was displaying an attitude of stretching out her neck to be slaughtered. However, her calm and gentle aura carried a devout awareness. It was just like this. It perfectly conformed to the positioning system of the format pyramid. It made all of Luo Nan's movements possess the righteousness and dignity of a monarch bestowed by God. Justice on the intrinsic plane and stimulation on the perceptual plane fused together. Luo Nan didn't have any reason to stop. Bang! The radiance suddenly flashed within his brain. It was as if friction brought forth wind, sweeping the surging emotions into a dark corner. The grayish-white radiance from the virtual brain's interface was relatively dim, but the information it brought possessed an overwhelming sense of existence. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. The mast of reason reappeared amidst the tide of emotions and instincts in his mind. He rapidly outlined the complete outline of the boat of logic within his habitual thinking that had accumulated over the years. What did I do when I pinched Snake Tongue's lower jaw earlier? Analyze the gauze of concealment. Analyze it? He didn't do anything. On the other hand, in the virtual brain interface, another new element had appeared after the night-level internal colonization basic biochemical reactor. It wasn't the gauze of concealment. It was the gauze of concealment plus the gauze of silence. These two strange objects existed within Snake Tongue's body at the same time. It was said that they once belonged to one body. The virtual brain's interface clearly verified this point. The image of the two pieces of fine yarn in the virtual brain's interface was like two interweaving and coiling wisps of green smoke. They could fuse into a ball at any time, but upon closer inspection, no matter how much they interweaved and changed, they were still distinct and not the slightest bit chaotic. More importantly, the interface showed that the analysis progress had already crossed 15%. This was an astonishing speed. It was much faster than Jean Tong's psychic light seed. It seemed to be a level higher than the biochemical reactor. Half a year ago, he had analyzed the biochemical reactor from Li Yiwei's body and found its true appearance. He had spent a total of 40 minutes. Looking at the current situation, he might be able to solve the problem in less than 20 minutes. Oh, maybe 10 minutes? Luo Nan had done a lot of research, and he had a basic understanding of the analysis mode of the external neuron. The biochemical reactor had an extremely fast analysis speed. The database already had the corresponding information. All he needed to do was to search for it. Jean Tong's psychic light seed belonged to the electromagnetic configuration category. Even though there were differences in Jean Tong's personal style and details, the general structure and outline remained the same. The analysis speed wasn't slow either. For instance, the Blood Soul Temple, Mo Luan, and Yuan X clearly didn't exist in the database. They could only start from the beginning, and they were often stuck in progress. Luo Nan needed his own understanding to be in place in order to advance faster. As for the Wraith sign, its system structure conflicted. Basically, there was no need to think about it. Clearly, the yarn of concealment and the yarn of silence belonged to the biochemical reactor situation. However, this pair of strange objects was clearly on Snake Tongue's body. Luo Nan didn't deliberately use interference waves to sense and detect them. The virtual brain system had already analyzed them, and they were naturally incorporated into Luo Nan's own system. Their ownership was clear. This is because Snake Tongue has already been captured by me. She has entered the great production line of formatting theory. She is a believer, so she belongs to me by default. Even the treasures on her body are mine? This way of thinking was pretty good. It was in line with the inclination of the human heart. Luo Nan no longer had any further thoughts. The rapid progress of the analysis was urging him to get down to business. If he were to continue, his thoughts would go crooked. He let out a silent sigh and pulled his hand back. It's fine. Snake Tongue finally revealed an astonished expression. Yin Lu, who was kneeling far away, was the same. The emotions in their hearts were much more complicated than their outward expressions. I can see it just by being here. Luo Nan gave a careless explanation. This explanation was nonsense, and the awkwardness that had disappeared all this time finally seeped out. He didn't really like this feeling. He let out a low cough and furrowed his brows. We need to do research today. We definitely won't be going to the market. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Yes. Yin Lu and Snake Tongue responded as one. Their tacit understanding was complete. But what should they do next? How should they spend the night? These two extremely scheming women were at a loss for a time. Luo Nan didn't have these worries because the virtual brain interface lit up with a red warning light at this moment. A pop-up window that had not appeared for a long time jumped out. Back when Luo Nan first came into contact with the virtual brain system, the continuous pop-up windows gave Luo Nan a certain psychological shadow. He deliberately changed the settings after he gained a basic understanding of the system. There was only one pop-up window right now, and it was just a string of flowing information. It was the language of a mysterious and unknown civilization. These words had already become the core of Luo Nan's formatting theory system. The general meaning of these words was already clear. Target architecture analysis complete. Corresponding data exists in the database. Establishing file index. Heaven Abyss code ******. Heaven Stairway level 4. Specialized spirit core production for lamination interference. Designer. Name. XX. Internal information. Not public. Chapter 805. Qu'est-ce it was true. The muslin of concealment and the muslin of silence were both products of a mysterious civilization. They were of the same origin as the divine binding hoop. However, the shape was more or less outside of Luo Nan's expectations. This sort of fabric-type object could be considered a spirit core? Though Luo Nan could borrow the marvelous power of the secret glyph to make wild guesses, his foundation was lacking in the end. He really could not understand the series of coding rules and characters on it. However, he could faintly understand the meaning of the name of the designer and the person who named it. According to the concepts of Earth, the first character roughly had the meaning of pillar or pillar. The second character felt like it had the meaning of seclusion or a house. How did he translate it? Liang. Liang Yin? Beam House? Liang Lu? That's it. It was more pleasing to the eye to translate it to Liang Lu. Luo Nen felt a sense of accomplishment as a translator, but this feeling soon vanished like smoke in a puff of smoke. It didn't matter what he translated this person's name into, and it didn't matter who Liang Lu was. The rapid analysis progress suddenly came to a halt when this piece of information appeared. The index had been established, and the direction was very clear. However, the corresponding information could not be opened at all. Luo Nan obviously noticed the words non-public, but he didn't think much of it in the beginning. After all, the external neuron was in his hands. What did it matter if it was internal or not? It looked like the situation was not simple at all. The progress stopped for approximately half a minute. Probably because the internal logic had taken a detour, a new round of information finally appeared in the window. Warning! Search content exceeds basic database access. The system has automatically initiated access detection procedures. Luo Nan's eyelids twitched twice. He captured the words access, detection, and so on. He instinctively had a bad premonition. He subconsciously consoled himself. The more restricted the information was, the more precious it should be. Right? The virtual brain system followed the established settings strictly. Conducting core configuration nature detection. Core configuration fusion type replacement process detected. Temporary ownership change completed. Access detection complete. Holder's current access. Ownership. Temporary. Knowledge search. Expert level. Pending detection. Resource transfer. Sergeant rank. Pending detection. Heaven Abyss Network. None, not connected. Warning. Holder's access is insufficient. Index has been erased. The corresponding information has entered special protection procedures. Hey! Luo Nan blurted out, attracting the attention of Snake Tongue and Yin Lu. But he did not know it at all. He simply pressed the virtual brain system with his telepathic thoughts, but after a round of operations, not just progress, even the information about Liang Lu in the pop-up window and the images of the Veil of Stealth and the Veil of Silence that he had mostly parsed were wiped clean. It was as if nothing had happened. What the hell is temporary? Luo Nan laughed in anger. It had been more than half a year since Luo Nan obtained the external neuron. Only today did Luo Nan realize that he was just a temporary holder. What if he met the real owner one day? Would he be able to break out of his head and return it to its rightful owner with a wave of his hand? Luo Zhongheng, my dear father, this is the present you gave your son for his birthday. But Luo Nan's smile was real. The external neuron was not impressive, and so was the virtual brain system. However, it was exactly because they were impressive that they appeared too profound and mysterious. The knowledge contained in it seemed like he would never be able to finish studying it in his lifetime. Luo Nan worked extremely hard, but even though he swallowed and digested the information inside in large gulps, the water level didn't seem to drop at all. He was still unable to find traces that belonged exclusively to his parents and grandfather. And now, the sudden restriction had caused him some trouble, but it also indicated a certain trend. Luo Nan touched the core portion of the external neuron. He had inadvertently touched upon clues and directions. How about I do it all over again? Luo Nan's thoughts wandered through the virtual brain's interface, which had already been cleaned by the special protection program. He absolutely didn't mind doing a few more rounds of testing. In this sort of situation, let alone a few rounds, he would be happy to go through a few hundred rounds. The external neuron was more direct than he imagined. A new pop-up window popped up in the next second. Its priority had already exceeded the system settings that Luo Nan had specially modified. This was because it carried a must-do option. Do you want to start the confirmation and review process? Review. This word was quite tyrannical. Could it be that the translation was the fault of the system? The smile on Luo Nan's lips became even more obvious. Even if the system gave him the opportunity to choose yes or no, he only had one path. He had to dig out the secrets of the external neuron. He had to trace the past of his grandfather, his parents, and the one who might have died, but there was still a faint hope. He couldn't say it. It wouldn't work if he said it. Luo Nan forcefully severed his thoughts and took a deep breath. The flexible e-ink screen, the external neuron, the virtual brain system. He proceeded layer by layer. What would come next? He stabbed his mind and directly chose, yes. The virtual brain's interface's stagnant state completely shattered, and the information window refreshed once more. Confirmation and review process initiated. The owner's genetic data has not been entered into the database. Automatically transferred to the 100-year sequence. The general education level testing system has been activated. Results have been queried. Results are being entered. Hold on. Results? When did I ever answer a test? That's not right. I answered it, but it was clearly marked with the word simulation. It was used for practice. Clearly, the virtual brain system and the confirmation and review process would not wait for him. They would not listen to his explanation. The results of the evaluation came out half a second later. Cultural Department. Results. None. Results. None. Results. None. Results. None. Direct Teachings Department. Specialization in the Configuration Department. Level 1 in the Creation Department. Overall results do not pass. Luo Nan's heart sank. The information refreshed once more. Subject specialization meets additional requirements. Calculating specialization bonus. General knowledge question bank is not weighted enough. Additional question bank data is transferred out. Specialization direction is being evaluated. Determining the direction of space-time configuration. Determining additional question difficulty to be specialization level 3 in space-time configuration. Can be lowered to specialization level 2. Can be raised to Heaven Stairway level 1. Selecting questions. He really had to take the test. Luo Nan gulped. He was a bit nervous. If he was not mistaken, generic, specialist, and stairway to heaven were the levels of knowledge in this mysterious civilization. The system also had the rank of petty officer. It looked like it was a judgment of social authority. It was similar to the SCA of Earth. It was not easy to make wild guesses about the mysterious civilization's method of judgment. But on the SCA's side, once one's authority level was set, one would need to spend a large amount of money to obtain victory through pure capital and power. Otherwise, one could only accumulate credit and contributions bit by bit. One step behind and one step behind, one step behind. Warning! No corresponding questions have been found in the local question bank. Automatically linked to the Heaven Abyss mirror system. Link to relay signal. Signal not linked. Signal already linked. Link broken. Warning! Link signal strength is extremely weak. Unable to link. Confirmation of authority review procedure failed. Bang! Luo Nan's fist smashed down, directly smashing the tatami into pieces. Snake Tongue and Yin Lu were both stupefied on the spot. Luo Nan's previous shouting and laughing was already very strange. Now his anger was completely without reason. Yin Lu wanted to ask, but at this time, the monocle floating in front of Luo Nan's left eye seemed to have a problem. Fine cracks blossomed on it, looking as if it could shatter at any moment. From Yin Li's angle, it was as if she could see the callous vertical pupils of a viper. They were filled with a dense feeling of inhumanity. Her courage to speak was completely drained in an instant. Whether it was Yin Lu or Snake Tongue, they both lowered their eyes and bent their backs. They just stared at the tatami beneath them like statues. So they didn't see the subtle change in Luo Nan's gloomy face behind the cracked monocle. Luo Nan felt the lens heat up slightly. The element that stimulated it was unexpectedly very far away. It was far behind the barriers of space and time, in the space of the tree hole of the mist maze where the lens was located. Right there, the torrents of information from every corner of the maze were still as chaotic and violent as ever. However, as the lens at the center of the tree hole, the screening efficiency of all the information had been significantly accelerated, and the corresponding consumption had been significantly increased, to the point that the space-time of Earth was affected. It seemed that some sort of clue had been exposed. Luo Nan reached out to touch the lens. The already extremely frail structure really couldn't hold on any longer. It shattered in an instant, transforming into faint water vapor that dissipated into nothingness. Luo Nan didn't care about this. His attention was divided into two. One returned to the space of the tree hole, and the other stayed within the virtual brain system. Then he saw the virtual brain system's information window undergo a new round of refreshing. It repeated the previous steps, Confirmation of authority review procedure initiated. Connection to Heaven Abyss mirror system. Connection to relay signal. Signal not connected. Relay signal? How could there be such a coincidence? Luonan thought about the origins of the external neuron. It was actively connecting to this signal. There was certainly a close connection between this signal and the chaotic information flow of the mist maze. Luonan suddenly stood up. Such a large movement caused Snake Tongue and Yinlu to raise their heads to look at him. Luonan wasn't in the mood to pay attention to them. He turned around and walked toward the master bedroom. Luonan's mind had already turned in many circles in the time it took him to take 2 steps. He seemed to recall that there were settings for functions like receiving signals and network links. Found it. Luonan soon found the specific settings related to signal links in the virtual brain system. He brought up a detailed visualization window. The details of the signal strength were clearly displayed on the interface that he didn't quite understand. He didn't understand the specific professional units of measurement, but the thermometer-style bar graph, the hierarchical nodes, and the corresponding color configurations were things that even a fool could understand. The black area at the bottom, as well as the adjacent red area, clearly meant that there was no signal and weak signal. The pointer that represented the signal strength swayed between these 2 regions. There were no signs of it increasing. There were too many interference factors in Earth space and time. He had to go back. The sound of scraping would rang out. The bamboo lattice sliding door of the master bedroom sensed his arrival and automatically opened. Luonan entered with large strides. He didn't wait for the sliding door to close. His figure impatiently entered the transition process of the sandwich domain. He disappeared like a bubble before Snake Tongue and Yinlu's eyes. The sliding door closed. 5 or 6 seconds passed before Yinlu finally spat out the breath she had been holding back in her throat. She unconsciously laughed a bit. This could be considered self-regulation. Finally. The yacht is fine. Okay, these words weren't funny at all. Luonan passed through the sandwich domain and directly jumped into the tree-hole space of the mist maze. The noises belonging to the material world disappeared the moment he entered. The sounds of wind, water, breathing, and the low hum of the yacht's motors were all erased. However, this place wasn't quiet. On a certain level, this place was noisier and more chaotic. 99% of the torrent of information that came from the depths of the mist maze didn't have any rules to speak of. It just poured in like a swarm of bees. Humans were essentially creatures of experience. They relied on experience to generate imagination and construct basic cognitive logic. It was fine to completely ignore the information that couldn't be incorporated into the scope of experience, but one had to forcefully sort it out and deal with it for a long period of time. It was absolutely not like what Luonan had told Ruewan before. It was forever overflowing with interest. Coolness, calmness, and patience were the most basic requirements when working in the tree hole. Therefore, Luonan forcefully endured the impatience in his heart. He circled around the central lens body within the narrow space and slowly walked 2 laps. He took a few deep breaths in between to adjust his state. 2 minutes later, he repositioned himself to the information window of the virtual brain system. Then he saw that the indicator of signal strength had slightly increased compared to the one on the yacht. A slight increase. The number of times it probed into the black area had clearly decreased, but it still floated in the red area most of the time. In other words, the signal was still in a weak state. Also, the system had a pop-up window asking if he wanted to abort the connection, probably because the connection had failed too many times. Luckily, Luonan had already prepared his heart. Although he was a bit disappointed, he still decisively refused. Keep calm. The situation is improving, Luonan said to himself. There were 2 aspects to consider this matter. Currently, the signal link between the tree hole and the external neuron didn't form a large increase. But what about the other way around? What effect would the signal link have on the tree hole? Luonan projected his thoughts onto the lens. The lens received interference from soul strength, and it gradually changed shape and color from a transparent crystalline state to form a nebula-like structure. A portion of the so-called nebula was a reflection of true information. But there was also a considerable portion that reflected Luonan's processing and understanding of the collected information. In Luonan's mind, the mist maze was divided into 2 layers. One layer was inside. The other layer was outside. The outer layer was the shattered space where Luonan and Gongqi had moved and fought. A trillion domain fragments floated within, forming a berserk, hazy, and immeasurable sandstorm. The sandstorm no longer possessed the ability to construct rules. With Luo Nan's abilities, he could arrange and assemble them in a relatively easy manner. If Luo Nan could do it, then the enormous gravitational law of the local spacetime of the Earth could be done as well. And so, a portion of the outer layer was constructed into the cloud world. In this sense, the outer layer of the mist maze was also dependent on the local spacetime of the Earth for its operation. Therefore, the natural environment and conditions of the cloud world were not too different from the Earth. This reflected the dependence of the rules. However, the direction of Luo Nan's research had never been the outer layer. According to his understanding, the so-called outer layer was nothing more than the waste that was ejected. It was a bewildering barrier that concealed the truth. The most valuable part of the mist maze, or perhaps its true appearance, was the deepest, inner layer region. It was the unknown structural core. From the long-term observation results of his father's double helix diagram and Luo Nan's observations over the past few days, Luo Nan was practically certain. Two kinds of rule systems were colliding in the core region. The intense collision caused the space-time environment to distort and fracture. The intensity exceeded imagination, forming layer upon layer of barriers that concealed the true appearance of the core region. The difficulty of observation in such an extreme environment was far too great. At the very least, his father had never succeeded in doing so until 6 years ago. The product of the Tree Hole project changed from a sail that sailed across the ocean to a satellite that orbited and surveyed the world. A large portion of Luo Zhongheng's later energy was used to analyze the signals emitted by the collision of galaxies. From Luo Nan's perspective, the tree hole was already of a very high level. But when faced with the complex environment of the core region, it became an old-fashioned radio. As the controller, Luo Nan could only endlessly adjust, calibrate, and cover manually in order to obtain a clearer and more accurate signal. There were no other methods that were more efficient. The problem was that even if the old-fashioned radio was manually operated to probe to the bottom, there were only a few circuits and components going back and forth. The audio signals received possessed clear rules and order. Luo Nan controlled the tree hole. There was no need to explain the complexity of the basic construction. He needed to mobilize his entire mind to capture the information flow from every level and every dimension. He needed to sort out logical clues from the chaos. Luo Nan was pondering over a more efficient method of analysis. He wanted to find an automated, semi-automated analysis method. He wanted to turn these details that needed to be sensed by soul strength into information that could be collected and analyzed by instruments on the material plane. He wanted to start with creation, but his train of thought wasn't particularly clear. And at this time, the signal link of the external neuron was like a beam of light in the darkness. This description was a bit disgusting, but it fit the essence. With his father's endorsement, the relationship between the external neuron and the mist maze was already as clear as day. It was just that he was unable to find a more substantial connection, until the signal link appeared. Luo Nan was almost certain that the signal received by the external neuron came from the core region of the mist maze. Most importantly, this signal certainly possessed some rules and order that could be deciphered. Luo Nan was still unclear about the details within. He was unable to sense the signal that the external neuron could sense. He was completely baffled by the logic of the external neuron's analysis of the signal. It was like how ordinary people were unable to sense the electromagnetic waves that penetrated their bodies at all times, but the corresponding electronic products could make full use of them. What did this mean? Thinking about it from a bad point of view, this meant that Luo Nan knew what was going on, but he didn't know why. The problem still couldn't be solved at its root. But thinking about it from a good point of view, this represented that Luo Nan had touched upon another dimension of information. Even though he didn't understand the logic within, he was able to make a certain direction of filtering based on the linked state of the system and the flood of information. Even though this sort of filtering was destined to be a stroke of luck type, it greatly increased the probability of success. In terms of personality, Luo Nan had the bad temper of a researcher. He was also a bit philosophical and idealistic. He wanted to get to the bottom of everything, and he always wanted to integrate a universal truth that was applicable to all things. But today, he was going to be a theory of results. He didn't care at all what the signal-receiving module inside the external neuron was like or what the logic of its analysis was like. All he wanted was for the virtual brain system to display the words, link successful. Techniques, theories, and the like had to take a back seat at this time. What was needed was patience and focus. Luonan rolled up his sleeves and forcefully slapped his cheeks. Let's do it. Reality proved that once a person became focused, they had no concept of time at all. During this time, Luonan's entire mind was used on the manual operation of the tree hole. He used it on the separation, classification, and interference of the flood of information. It was hard for him to capture the unique characteristics of the so-called relay signal. He could only endlessly select samples from the flood of information, slice them, compare them, and filter them. Even if he couldn't increase the signal strength, he could still reduce the signal strength. As long as it was a method that could affect the relay signal, Luonan would search for it, examine it, and make a further attempt. Of course, he still had to make records. Since these were things on the perceptual plane, many of them were subtle and indescribable feelings. Luonan was really unable to reason them out logically. Aside from words, quantitative analysis, and structural diagrams, there were also large amounts of bizarre lines, outlines, colors, and the like. These were some immediate feelings, emotions, and impressions. Because of this, Luonan, who had always adhered to the classical realistic style of painting, had to deviate towards the modern and postmodern direction. Later on, Luonan flipped through the interface of the work area. Even Luonan himself was unable to understand psychic diagrams. Luonan even had to bite the bullet to recall and analyze them. He went back and forth like this, over and over. He switched between the dual domains of logic and sensation. Luonan was highly sensitive to changes in information, but he was slow and even numb in other aspects. But numbness had its limits. Luonan didn't know why, but a wave of dizziness suddenly assaulted his mind. His mind went blank for a moment. He instinctively wanted to trace back to his previous train of thought in this moment of stupefaction. He flipped through the records of the work area, but his outstretched hand was clearly trembling. Sweat flowed down his wrist all the way to his elbow before dripping down. Why is it so hot? Luonan mumbled to himself. Only then did he discover that his head was covered in sweat. His body was also quite oily. But the most important thing was the feeling of exhaustion. The feeling of exhaustion from both the mental and the fleshly body was rapidly becoming clear. This was not a good sign. For someone like Luonan, who had the hidden danger of an imbalance between body and soul, exhaustion posed a greater threat than direct injury. Just like this feeling of stuffiness. There seemed to be an enormous source of heat in the surroundings of the tree hole right now. The radiated heat was endlessly increasing. But Luonan could sense that the material plane had not truly heated up. It was more like a psychological effect. This omen was not too good. It was like he was both mentally and physically exhausted. The structure of his body and soul was unstable, bringing about hallucinations and triggering a reaction from his body. Luonan shook his head and slowed down the rhythm of his thoughts. But he still could not help but look at the signal interface of the virtual brain system. The intensity needle was still floating in the red range. Even though it was far from black, it was still a certain distance away from the higher level of light orange. Oh! Luonan sighed. As for the Windows new message, the signal has been connected. The verification procedure has been initiated. The Heaven Abyss mirror system is awakening. Ha! Luonan's thoughts came to a standstill in this instant. A thousandth of a second later, a cry of "Hey!" He did not even pay attention to the window interface that was refreshing like a stream. Instead, he turned his head and stabilized the state of the tree hole and the lens in the first instance. Then, he frantically recorded the concrete structure and sensory information. For a time, Luonan had to record, stabilize, and continue to make minute adjustments. He had no idea whether the direction was correct or not. He was simply like a clown blindfolded, riding a wheelbarrow, and throwing knives. He was flustered and nearly vomiting blood. But a few seconds later, reality proved that his reaction was correct. The intensity of the signal continued to fluctuate in the red range. It did not change for the better, nor did it change for the worse. Of course, the link was unstable. It broke more than once in the middle. Luckily, Luonan was able to capture some basic data in that instant. He even had the feeling of unspeakable realm. He gritted his teeth and made adjustments, barely managing to maintain the frequency. After a series of operations, The signal link finally maintained a stable state for a long period of time. About 2 minutes? It was only now that Luo Nan, who was on the verge of collapse, had the chance to look at the refreshed window information. Perhaps, he had really set foot into the deep contents of the external neuron. The window swept through the information stream. There were large amounts of technical words that he did not quite understand. There were some special nouns that he could vaguely understand under the translation of his secret glyph, but he was unable to find the corresponding description no matter how hard he tried. Luckily, there were still some relatively friendly characters mixed in. The Heavenly Abyss mirror system has partially awakened. Preparing for the verification of authority. The signal link strength is insufficient. There is a risk of interruption in the interactive test. Warning. Once the interactive test is interrupted, the verification of authority will fail. A second test cannot be conducted within XX time unit. It is recommended to increase the signal or choose to download it locally and enter offline test mode. Do you want to proceed with the offline test? Oh, how considerate. It seemed that the person who established the verification program had also considered the various possibilities of the signal condition. The interactive test was definitely not an option. The current signal strength was unable to give one any confidence. The misty labyrinth was fundamentally a turbulent environment. With the current signal strength, it would be far too easy to fall. Then, he would choose to download it locally. Warning. According to the verification program, the difficulty of the offline test will rise by 1 level. Luo Nan slapped his forehead, but he chose yes without the slightest hesitation. From his perspective, this was the only answer. Soon, a progress bar appeared on the virtual brain interface. There was nothing new about it. But Luo Nan was perfectly satisfied as long as it could persevere. Looking at the progress bar, the speed didn't seem to be slow. After observing for approximately 5 minutes, it seemed to be crawling at a rate of 1%. Before this thought could be completed, the signal was cut off once more. Luo Nan spat out a mouthful of saliva when he said, "Fuck." But no matter how restless he was, he could not be the slightest bit messy with the utilization and analysis of his power on the mental plane. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he could not be bothered to wipe it away. Luckily, the signal strength was restored to an acceptable degree after a series of operations. The link was re-established, and the progress bar was already completed. It seemed that there were no losses. It looked like the basic connection function was still there. Luo Nan really was about to collapse. He sat down on his butt and leaned against the inner wall of the tree hole, gasping for breath. Time passed by bit, and Luo Nan wiped his sweat endlessly during this time. There seemed to be some problems with his body's metabolism. In the end, he was just too tired. The state of his body and soul had already reached its limit. Any more and it would be like burning oil in a lamp. There would be no benefit at all. Looking at the progress bar, it would take at least 10 hours before the download could be completed. And this was assuming that the signal link was stable from beginning to end. Luo Nan certainly would not be able to endure until then, given his current state of consumption. He needed to rest, otherwise he would lose control of his body and soul frame due to exhaustion. Even if the download was completed, he would not have the life to test it. After weighing the pros and cons in his mind, Luo Nan gritted his teeth and did 2 more experiments. He confirmed that the signal link strength was stable within a certain range under the current state of the tree hole. Though the data download was still intermittent, it would take a few seconds to a few minutes for the link to come back. The loss in progress was within an acceptable range. It's stable now. Luo Nan cheered himself on. He also did some mental adjustments. He needed to stabilize his mind and sleep. But when he leaned against the solid wall and closed his eyes for less than 2 seconds, he suddenly opened them again. This won't do. Luo Nan was aware of his own situation. The self-adjustment of his body and soul frame in an unconscious state would cause interference to the space-time environment involved in his domain. Not to mention the precise environment of the tree hole. He needed to receive a stable signal at all times. If he slept here, all his previous efforts would have been wasted the moment he woke up. It was best to avoid it. How could he avoid it? Luo Nan grabbed his wet hair and pondered for a long time. Finally, he smacked his forehead. When he raised his hand again, his fingertips were clearly pinched with a fine and brilliant spark of electricity. He took out the external neuron and carefully placed this inconceivable strange object by the side of the lens, causing it to float naturally. Luo Nen cherished this strange object greatly ever since he obtained it. He rarely let it be exposed to the outside world. However, the tree hole could not be considered outside. This was a part of the construction of Luo Nan's domain. There was no essential difference between being here and being inside his skull. But in this way, Luo Nan could use the space-time barrier to create a buffer zone. He could avoid direct interference from the adjustment of his body and soul frame. It was a win-win strategy. Now, pull away. Luo Nan returned to Earth space-time once more. He looked at the light outside the porthole. It should be late at night. He didn't care about the specific time period at all. Luo Nan's legs went limp when he stepped on the tatami of the master bedroom. He was careless, and his left foot tripped over his right foot. He fell to the ground, sprawled on his back, and flipped over. The feeling of exhaustion and weakness had completely broken through his limits. He hadn't been this tired even when he fought with Gong Qi. Luo Nan confirmed one last time that the external neuron was still downloading after passing through multiple space-time barriers. Luo Nan quickly fainted. Actually, I should take a bath. This was his last thought. Chapter 806. Luo Nan slept, but he didn't sleep peacefully. The heat on his body followed him like a shadow. Even though he was in a cabin with a suitable temperature, the heat did not subside. In addition, his mind was overly tense. He seemed to have woken up twice in the middle. He looked at the download progress in a daze, confirming that the link still existed and that the progress bar was crawling at a tortoise speed. Only then did he fall asleep again. Oh, I think I went back to the tree hole once? In any case, the boundary between dream and reality had unknowingly dissolved in the end. A portion of his consciousness entered dormancy, but there was another portion that remained highly active. Or perhaps various brain regions took turns entering an excited state. Luo Nan gradually got used to this state. His consciousness went from being tangled and struggling at the beginning to becoming a matter of course. It extended and overflowed at will. There was no end to it. Luo Nan's soul strength was powerful. There were very few people who could match the depth and range of his senses. As long as he willed it, the entire Earth and the cloud world would become his playground. Normally, under the control of reason, he would more or less have some misgivings. He needed to cultivate and research into configuration and other knowledge. He didn't have the leisure to let his mind wander. But right now, he was half asleep and half awake. He just wanted to be comfortable and at ease. How could he care so much? For a time, Luo Nan's consciousness flowed without restraint. It suddenly went to the east. It suddenly went to the west. It suddenly went to the sea. It suddenly went to the clouds. With the support of the soul cloak constructed by the condensation ring, he could move unimpeded as long as there was water vapor. He could travel thousands of kilometers with a single thought. Moreover, his mind instructs in a second, was definitely not limited to this material world. There were 10 billion people on Earth. No matter how they were spread out like stars on a chessboard, separated by the sea and the sky, Luo Nan could see that their self-awareness was like water droplets popping and popping. Together, they converged into a vast ocean of the mental world. It was boundless, and there were few separations. This was a more interesting place than the real world. The circumstances of every second were completely different from the last second. Luo Nan had operated in the mental sea more than once before. For example, he used the dream entering technique to construct a special dreamland. He guided and gathered information from all sides to form a psychic diagram. He obtained the miraculous effect of foresight. But this time, Luo Nan didn't possess a clear goal. He didn't even have clear cognition. He just endlessly wandered, expanding and contracting his consciousness. He was equivalent to a hairy child in a dream. He constantly moved his pillow and kicked his blanket to obtain a more comfortable position. His mental ocean was still too illusionary and unstable. It was like a misty maze where fluff was flying everywhere, but he lacked a blanket that could be gathered together. Luo Nan tossed and turned again and again, but he was unable to find that comfortable feeling no matter how hard he tried. He simply relied on himself. He spread out an enormous multi-dimensional spiderweb within the boundless and limitless void. Yes, He would obviously use the wraith sign system at this time. Luo Nan spread out the spiderweb of the altar, and the wraith sign resided in the center of the spiderweb. It was not the master, but it had become the mount of Luo Nan's consciousness. It climbed up and down within the spiderweb, entering and exiting the windows of everyone's hearts. It drew out the spider threads of desire, weaving an increasingly complex web. Desire was turbid and chaotic, and the corresponding consciousness was also chaotic and changeable. It did not possess any specific rules. Only when an external force deliberately guided it would it form a certain trend. This was not a time of war. Luo Nan's consciousness merely drifted according to its nature. Therefore, the spiderweb woven by the wraith sign did not activate the altar frame rule of victory notification, defeat withers. It just slightly drew in the sea of consciousness, allowing it to form a rough shape. This made Luo Nan feel a bit more comfortable. Luo Nan really did feel quite a bit more comfortable. The sea of consciousness that was drawn in by the spiderweb was filled with cool water vapor that enveloped him. Hold on. How could the emotions of living beings endlessly rise and fall in agitation become cool? Luo Nan intuitively felt a bit awkward. The side of reason that was alternating shifts displayed its use in a timely manner. It captured the crucial point that he had overlooked all this time. It wasn't that this side was too cold. It was that the other side was too hot. Oh, the sun was very poisonous. Luo Nan turned his head, and it was also in this instant that his soul shone under the blazing sunlight. In the unfathomable abyss far away in the void, the brilliant sun was like an enormous demonic eye. It stared straight at him. Light and heat were highly condensed and refined violent forces. Even though it passed through layers upon layers of barriers of space and time, it still possessed the destructive radiation that could burn the soul and the heart. The wraith sign, who had appeared as a mount, was like thin ice under this brilliant and powerful light. It was like a faint shadow. It was hard for it to survive. It collapsed into a shapeless form, leaving Luo Nan alone. Oh, it's you. Why are you suddenly so lively? It seems like you've gotten quite a bit closer. Luo Nan was stupefied. He felt that this was quite absurd, so he laughed. The abyssal sun was silent. It just radiated boundless light and heat into Luo Nan's consciousness and desires, filling his soul with a unique restless power. You're the one playing tricks behind the scenes. Luo Nan didn't quite understand the details of his perception. He just felt a bit bloated. This was most likely due to the swelling of his mental plane. It allowed him to easily toss aside all apprehensions and shackles. He was fearless as he faced the blazing sun directly. He didn't just confront it. He even wanted to trace it backwards and see where the foundation of this demonic sun lay. This thought stirred in Luo Nan's mind. Then, his mind really did trace the brilliant light. It extended all the way to the distant void. It was unbelievably smooth. Oh, he seemed to have forgotten something? In any case, Luo Nan had a feeling that he and the abyssal sun had formed some sort of resonance. This was a power of internal connection. It was like the gravitational pull of the material universe. It penetrated the endless walls of the void and acted upon each other. Why? Walala! Walala! A familiar sound lingered in the surroundings. This was a listening question, and it was also a free-point question. The image of the heavily chained crow appeared in the depths of Luo Nan's consciousness in the first instant. The chain seemed to be forged from some unknown metal. It was the origin of Luo Nan's extraordinary power. It was the initial construction of formatting theory. It was also the materialization of the concept of my heart's a prison. It was this materialization of extraordinary power that created something out of nothing. It subdued the wraith sign with some sort of innate restraining power, giving Luo Nan the source of power to increase his power beyond the norm. And now, it transmitted this innate restraining power to the abyssal sun behind the layers of void. At least that was what it felt like. Also, Luo Nan himself had brought it over. His consciousness followed the extension of the heavily chained crow, rapidly approaching the abyssal sun. It felt like he was rapidly descending down a zipline. His speed grew faster and faster, and he could feel the blazing light and heat more vividly. At the same time, a rumbling sound reverberated in the vast and hazy void. It grew clearer and clearer, louder and louder, and grander and grander. It was absolutely not an effect that could be formed by a single chain. Luo Nan's consciousness was in a state of unconsciousness. It was quite difficult for him to deal with the changes in speed, temperature, sound intensity, and other levels of information. In the end, he even felt dizzy. His consciousness went blank for a moment. By the time he connected the chains of consciousness, he had already entered an inconceivable world. The reason why it was a world was because it was big. It was indescribably huge and deep. The most dazzling thing within was undoubtedly the abyssal sun. It rolled, expanded, and shrunk. It sprayed out a terrifying flow of fire from time to time, and it caused the undulating flow of fire to form countless demonic and malevolent figures in the outer region. They were like living creatures. However, such an existence was not the main body of this world. Luo Nan's consciousness only paused on the sun for a moment before it shifted uncontrollably. It turned to other areas that the light could not illuminate. This other area was truly vast and boundless. However, this area was filled with layer after layer of dark chains. They were immeasurable, and the dark chains could not be seen from beginning to end. They weaved and crisscrossed, moving back and forth, interlocking with each other. They hummed and vibrated, converging into a harmony that made one's scalp go numb. They constructed a complex, dense, and boundlessly deep sealed prison. They were the main body of this world. Perhaps they were the essence of the abyss. Luo Nan's own dark chains seemed to have fused into this sealed prison. It was the only end that could be seen, but it was also like the only loose slipknot. Well, this was just sleep talk. Luo Nan was probably awake now, but it was more like a dream than any other time. His consciousness merely wandered at the edge of the abyssal world. He was ignorant and shocked. Luo Nan had once viewed the core of his own format pyramid under Gym Master Xiao's guidance. He had also seen the unique image of the dark chains densely woven. It was somewhat similar to the current absolute chain prison. However, the difference in scale and complexity of the interweaving structure was like the difference between heaven and earth. There was practically no meaning in comparing them. If Luo Nan were to force a comparison, then Luo Nan's was at most a crude model. Its degree of precision and rigor were inferior to even the most basic link node of this absolute chain prison. However, there was clearly an extremely close and direct connection between the two. Could this be the source of the power of my heart's a prison? I think I saw an amazing fellow. How could there be such a place in the universe? Where in the world was it? With Luo Nan's current level of strength, any conjectures were shallow and laughable when compared to this world. He was unwilling to engage in meaningless conjectures. His consciousness naturally extended outwards, attempting to copy down this grand, precise, and rigorous system for further research. Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts approached the depths of the abyssal sun wheel and the absolute chain prison. They grew clearer and clearer, allowing him to see more close-up scenes and understand more of the truth. There was no doubt that the sun wheel and the absolute prison were in constant conflict and confrontation. The absolute prison constructed from endless chains constructed the abyss, firmly imprisoning the sun wheel in its deepest depths. It compressed the space for its existence and weakened its life force. But during this process, every single chain endured a violent and blazing baptism of high temperatures. The detailed structure of the myriad chains was often shattered and then recombined. The recombined structure was different from before. It was as if the sun wheel had melted and even remolded them. Luo Nan was practically engrossed in this cycle of conflict and reconstruction. This was because he saw the supreme and deep configuration thinking within, as well as the incomparably vivid demonstration of the material. Every time it exceeded his imagination, it was just right. It was truly miraculous. Ha! A subtle and abrupt incongruity was embedded in at an inopportune time. It was like a dim mark that appeared on the bright and clean surface of the jade porcelain. Simple, crude, rigid, dilapidated. Luo Nan came up with 7 or 8 similar adjectives in an instant. But the most direct noun that followed nearly choked him. It was a spaceship. A spaceship parked at the edge of the abyss world. It looked as if it could collapse at any moment. It looked quite familiar. This was the basic information Luo Nan grasped in a short amount of time. He wanted to capture even more details, but when his telepathic thoughts crossed a certain boundary, his eyes suddenly blurred. Emptiness and turbidity. Colorful light flew chaotically. There was also an enormous tension and repulsion that accompanied the chaos. It nearly burst the structure of his consciousness. What configuration demonstration? What docked spaceship? Everything was destroyed. This The vague feeling of forgetfulness that had always been at the bottom of Luo Nan's heart was flipped over at this moment. It brought back memories that had settled at the bottom of his heart. It was the experience of looking directly at the abyssal sun wheel last time. It was the time when the light of polar domain was created in a few months. The terrifying storm that originated from the abyssal sun wheel crushed through the distant space-time. If it weren't for the sealing power of the Dark Chains Dam, Luo Nan would have probably turned to ash within the raging flames of his emotions and desires. Even so, it was just a distant glance. Now he was actually this close. I'm greedy. Luo Nan suddenly came to a realization. Everything he saw just now was perhaps just a certain point in the abyss world. Perhaps the opposing forces had reached a balance, a seemingly calm illusion. Right now, the illusion was shattered. The balance was broken. Everything entered a set state of violent distortion. Just how many details did he see just now? Just how much information was gushing out from those details in an explosive fashion? The magnificent scenery transformed into a dazzling and fatal shock wave in the blink of an eye. The structure of space-time was like a tattered rag sheet. Countless layers of twists and turns folded over each other. This warped power was released to even further space, to even more dimensions. Luo Nan's probing telepathic thoughts immediately turned into a high-voltage circuit. An indescribably enormous attack struck back like lightning, piercing through the frame of his body and soul. The power of the sun wheel and absolute hell, as well as the corresponding information, all poured into his brain. There was no doubt that the power of the backlash was extremely terrifying. And this time, the dark chains were no longer insulated. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that the power of the backlash pushed forward in a crushing fashion within the frame of Luo Nan's body and soul. The first thing it came into contact with was Luo Nan's mental plane. The power of the backlash was very terrifying, but the depth and breadth of this area was quite praiseworthy. It was like a meteor falling from the heavens. Below it was a vast ocean of icebergs, desolate and uninhabited. No matter how terrifying the impact and the killing power were, a large buffer and sedimentation would appear here. Of course, there would still be killing power when it overflowed. But there was another vast buffer zone outside the vast ocean of icebergs formed by Luo Nan's God Wheel. This was the sea of consciousness that Luo Nan's altar had gathered together. The emotions and thoughts of billions of living beings from all over the world were gathered within the sea of consciousness that was gathered by the spider web. They weren't good at anything else, but their enormous numbers and loose structure were like an enormous fluffy sponge. The powerful and surging power of the backlash and the corresponding flood of information were absorbed and digested layer by layer. Luo Nan was able to sense the dual power that came from the abyss world flowing within the spider web. It flowed over every node. It flowed over the living beings that were entangled on every knot of the web. The miraculous thing was that the altar's spider web, which was the supporting structure, directly withstood the attack. It didn't feel too much pressure. Instead, it went deeper and deeper as the power of the backlash deepened. The web was woven into the complex minds of billions of people, becoming even more dense and strict. Was it a misconception? It was like a wave of nutrients had been injected in. That was right. The structure of the altar's spider web originated from two forces. The first was the Wraith sign. It could already be confirmed that it originated from the projection of the abyssal sun wheel. The second was the framework of the altar. From what Luo Nan could see now, there was an 80 to 90% chance that this framework came from the absolute chain prison on the other side. In this way, there was the scorching heat and guidance from the abyssal sun wheel. There was also the harsh rules and control power from the absolute chain prison. They interweaved together. There was intense conflict, but there was also a subtle combination. This pair of equally grand forces clashed and cooperated. They were contradictory yet compatible. Within the sea of consciousness, within the living beings on the spider web, and even within the frame of Luo Nan's body and soul, they were drawn and spiraled, ever-changing. Well, the conflict was still mainstream. This caused the medicinal power of the nutrients to not be gentle enough. After the first wave of stimulating growth, the internal conflict quickly took the upper hand. It was only now that Luo Nan truly felt the pressure. The pressure and stimulation of this information that came from the abyss settled within the frame of his body and soul. It was also on the boundary of his thoughts. It was like a wave beating against the shore, pounding endlessly. Most of it was unable to reach the shore, but the ones that did hit the shore were like a flood that overflowed a dike. They drowned Luo Nan. Luo Nan was quite familiar with this. He had been facing a similar flood of information for the past few days. However, this flood was different from the chaotic fragments that he didn't know how to deal with. This wave of flood gradually eroded, seeped, decomposed, and absorbed within the spiderweb. Slowly, it became clear and logical, forming a vague framework of knowledge. Layer after layer of structure was piled up. Order. The most beautiful order. Even though it was heavy to the point of being hard to bear, it made one unable to stop. Luo Nan let out a long breath. His various planes of consciousness awakened one after another under the control of order. He unwittingly became completely clear-headed. He opened his eyes. The flat ceiling of the cabin was reflected in his eyes. There was also the blood-like sunset that penetrated through the porthole. The information of the material world was rich and vivid. It was most suitable for humans to receive and understand. It was just that Luo Nan turned a blind eye to it. Instead, he gave up the easy for the difficult. He went to decipher the enormous information structure that still settled within the frame of his body and soul, the altar's spider web. He made appropriate associations and extensions. Luo Nan naturally thought of his own situation. He was probably the primary martial arena of the conflict between the Sun Wheel and Absolute Prison in the space-time of Earth. It had been going on for a very long time. The configuration system and the wraith sign system. Reason and emotions. Rules and chaos. Wasn't this the case? There was also the mist maze. The current Luo Nan could make a clearer judgment of the core area of the mist maze. Conflict, distortion, coexistence. It was very similar. Needless to say, there was also the broken spaceship, which could prove it on another level. There could be a lot of spaceships, but it was almost identical to the outer space spaceship, one of the two major satellites in the virtual brain interface. It couldn't have been a damn coincidence, could it? Everything was linked together. The abyss world was the source of everything. Once Luo Nan comprehended this, his understanding of the information of the mist maze naturally rose to a higher level. This was the essential reason why the spider web was able to digest and absorb the information. Oh, the altar's spider web structure itself seemed to be very suitable for a further understanding of the chaotic information of the mist maze. Machines and programs were unable to decipher information that was overflowing with contradictions and conflicts. But life with spiritual intelligence, especially humans, seemed to be naturally prepared for this information. Actually, the vast majority of people did not possess the qualities to analyze complex information. But within the altar's spiderweb system, they were equivalent to lab rats. Luo Nan could observe the effects they received and make reverse deductions. From there, he could filter, precipitate, and wash out the most useful results. At this moment, Luo Nan's train of thought, which had always been unclear, became much clearer. Light flashed. Not good. There were far too many bursts of inspiration. He needed to memorize them all and go back to experiment with them one by one. Luo Nan wanted to get up and take notes, but he was unable to get up when he exerted force. The muscles and tendons involved in exerting force seemed to have completely lost their elasticity. They were sluggish and powerless. He took a deep breath and forcefully increased his strength. Finally, he raised an arm and placed it in front of his eyes. The cuffs of his sleeves were already drenched in sweat. The exposed arm was actually swollen by a size compared to before. His fair skin was now crisscrossed with blue and purple. Some of the subcutaneous tissues had already been destroyed, oozing with blood. This feeling. It was like someone had beaten him up while he was asleep. And so Luo Nan knew that the progress in the direction of the mist maze was not something that could be obtained casually. The frame of body and soul, especially the skeletal side, had already walked a full circle around the edge of the cliff. Luo Nan just raised his arm like this. He was a bit stunned. He wasn't frightened by the miserable scene. Instead, he thought of something else. In the past, he felt that the information of the double helix left behind by his old man did not completely and clearly explain the essence of the structure of the mist maze. He felt that the research was incomplete because he lacked the strength and time. But with this, his train of thought suddenly took a huge turn. If he possessed the preconditions of the external neuron, the real actions of the signal link, and the cultivation foundation of formatting theory were present, it seemed that he was close enough according to his current design. No, it was clearly too close. Why did he suddenly have such a dream? From the first half of the dream that he vaguely remembered, he could obtain an explanation. He had received the radiation of the abyss sun wheel for a long period of time. That was why he was drenched in sweat in the tree hole. He was restless and restless. His emotions were affected and interfered with. Also, the pulling power that came from the heavily chained crow was absolutely inseparable from the absolute chain prison, which was the opposite of the sun wheel. This was the gravity that came from the abyss world. Luo Nan had thought of every method possible to unearth the mysteries of the mist maze over the past few days. But he never expected that the more he analyzed, the closer he got to the abyss world. He also rapidly approached the taboo contained within. The truth was very beautiful, but one had to use one's life to decipher it. It was hard for him to hold on for long with his injured limbs. His swollen arm fell onto the tatami with a thud. There was no intense pain. He just felt numb and powerless. He could basically confirm that his nervous system had been injured. Due to the special nature of nerve cells, this was a very serious injury even for an ability user. It was even possible for him to become disabled. Luo Nan didn't really care about his own injuries. Instead, he thought of another old matter. An old matter that most likely no longer held any meaning. Perhaps on the other side. His father had suffered a loss? He wasn't too sure of his father's strength, but he knew that his father wouldn't be at the extraordinary level and wouldn't be stronger than him. He most likely wouldn't have the soul cloak or the altar spider web, which were blessed by the heavens. Then what about the gravity and impact that came from the abyss world? Luo Nan smashed the tatami again. Then he closed his eyes and muttered, "It's useless to think about these things. Next. Mr. Yin Lu, who was outside, heard the noise over here and asked in a low voice. Luo Nan didn't open his eyes, but Yin Li's current state was naturally reflected in his mind. She should have been waiting outside for quite some time. Her mental plane was fluctuating quite a bit. She probably had something she wanted to report, but she didn't dare to disturb him. Luo Nan heard a sound from inside, so he took the initiative to ask. "Come in." Luo Nan discovered that his throat was incredibly dry when he spoke. His voice had already changed pitch. The bamboo lattice door opened. Snake Tongue remained in a kneeling position outside. She feigned an inviting gesture as she invited Yin Lu inside. She grasped her posture quite well. But soon, Yin Li's startled cry caused the entire scene to collapse. "Mr." Yin Lu rushed inside, and Snake Tongue straightened her back from outside the door. She was stunned, speechless. Luo Nan could roughly feel how bad his body's condition looked. He just hoped that it wasn't a bloody nose and swollen face. "Stop. It's not that serious." Luo Nan didn't want to create that sort of mourning scene. He added a bit of soul strength, and his limp, exhausted body flipped over without the need for any muscles. It was as if he was in a gravity-free environment in outer space. Yin Lu was stopped by his shout. She stopped walking, but her face was still deathly pale. Luo Nan's state just now was simply that of a swollen corpse. It really scared her. Behind her, Snake Tongue broke away from her shock a bit earlier than Yin Lu. Her pitch-black pupils rapidly swept across Luo Nan's body, and her eyelids drooped down again. But then she bent her waist even more. Her forehead was nearly stuck to the tatami, expressing her attitude for not taking good care of him. "It's just a small hiccup. Don't worry." Luo Nan continued to comfort her. Yin Lu blurted out, "Is it because of the sunlight nightmare?" "Ha!" Luo Nan blinked. "What's that?" "You." Yin Lu spat out half of her words. Finally, her long years of experience as a secretary came into play. She forcefully suppressed the doubts in her heart and explained honestly, "Just an hour ago, a large-scale similar nightmare phenomenon appeared on the west coast of the new continent. According to current statistics, at least 100 million people dreamt of encountering the blazing sun, intense light, high temperatures, and other situations while they were sleeping." Luo Nan raised an eyebrow. Of course Yin Lu saw it, but she could only feign ignorance. She continued, "Someone posted this experience online, and it caused a lot of agreement and reposts. It has already formed a trend of panic in the new continent. Since the incident has only been happening for a short period of time, the statistics are still ongoing. I'm afraid the number of people will rise by a large margin." Luo Nan asked, "Is it just the other side?" "No. From the looks of it, The west coast of the Pacific Ocean and even the old continent are experiencing similar situations. It's only because of the time zone factor. It's daytime, and the number of people sleeping is few, so it hasn't formed a large-scale effect. This is especially true on the plane of the inner world. Many ability users have given feedback, and the influence is even more prominent in the circle of orders. It's said that some orders that worship the sun have already begun to prepare for sacrificial activities over at Band City. Correspondingly, orders that worship the night, the moon, and other images have been impacted. I just heard that there have already been serious injuries caused by the backlash. I've also asked T-City. The Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District hasn't been impacted, but the number of believers that have been affected isn't small. However, the feedback is quite positive. Perhaps it's because the laws and principles of my religion don't conflict with the image of this wheel. Luo Nan slowly moved his fingers and evaluated. It's a mess. Yes. Lu had previously suspected that the sunlight nightmare was highly related to Luo Nan. Now, she was even more suspicious. It was just that it had changed from a positive correlation to a negative correlation. In short, it was inextricably linked. Of course she didn't dare to say it out loud. After she finished explaining the basic situation, she quietly listened to Luo Nan's opinion. The polar domain of the Abyss District hasn't been impacted. It's mainly concentrated on the plane of the mental sea, which is a level lower than the light of the polar domain. The same level and same source of power will also change. There was something Luo Nan didn't say. Compared to the light of the polar domain that had gone out of control, could this be considered a digestion in a certain sense? As he muttered to himself, Li's eyelids twitched to the side. Due to her insufficient cultivation, she had only heard of the light of the polar domain several months ago. She didn't have a direct view of it. She only knew that it had caused an enormous shock in the upper echelons of the inner world. Mister, can't you cover this up a bit? It's a global influence. As for Xia City, forget it. The way things are right now, it's shameful no matter what. I'll just pretend I don't know about it. Luo Nan's body gradually felt better during this period of time. As a result, his body felt more and more uncomfortable. He had been sweating from the time he fell asleep to the time he woke up. His sweat soaked through all of his clothes. After he turned over, the half-wet clothes that hung on his body slid against the surface of his body. They were a bit sticky. He really couldn't bear it. I want to take a bath. Chapter 807. No matter how Luo Nan's tone was, whether it was Lu or Snake Tongue, they all treated it as an order to carry it out. 15 minutes later, Luo Nan was already submerged in the warm and slightly scalding hot soup. His back was leaning against the wooden wall of the pool, allowing the layers of heat to seep through the pores of his skin and flesh to permeate into his internal organs. As for whether or not this method was appropriate while he was injured, Luo Nan didn't mention it. Lu and Snake Tongue didn't have the leeway to comment. It had to be said that the traditional bathing culture of Band City was quite unique. Due to limited conditions, there was no hot spring on the yacht. But with Snake Tongue, who was born and raised in Osaka City and had been nurtured in traditional shrines for over 10 years, she was able to use the limited facilities to achieve a similar level of enjoyment. Under Snake Tongue's service, Luo Nan washed his body clean. Then he entered the narrow and small bathroom and soaked in the deep pool that could only fit 2 or 3 people. The ceiling above his head and even the deck above him were all opened up, revealing passageways that were like the walls of a well. The passageways led to the faintly dimming light of the sky. The claustrophobia and tranquility of being a frog in a well actually caused some philosophical thoughts to settle down. Luo Nan leaned against the wall of the pool, inhaling and exhaling warm water vapor. Behind him, Snake Tongue raised a wooden ladle and poured warm water from a bamboo pipe onto his shoulders and back. The change in temperature and the impact of the water continued to provoke the senses of his body. When he got used to it or became numb to it, there would be a strange tipsy feeling in his mind that quietly dissipated. You really know how to enjoy life. Luo Nan mumbled with his eyes closed. The direction of his words was rather vague. It was unclear whether he was referring to the previous owner of the yacht or Snake Tongue, who was currently serving behind him. Through the mist, Lu wanted to reply, but in the end, she felt that it wasn't appropriate and did not speak. She could only feel the awkwardness in her heart. The bathroom wasn't that big to begin with. The pool took up nearly 2/3 of the area. Snake Tongue was behind Luo Nan, watering the water, and Yin Lu was squeezed near the door. Especially since she was wearing a business suit that didn't match her appearance. She didn't wear shoes, and the steam had soaked her coat and her stockings. She looked a little embarrassed. What was even more annoying was the sullen feeling of working for someone else. The yacht she'd bought with her own hands had unexpectedly become Snake Tongue's home court due to Harmony Wind's renovation. The former witch's behavior was so natural and perfectly integrated with the current scene. It was as if as long as she was there, more exquisite and delicate enjoyment could be discovered. In this place, Snake Tongue didn't need to do anything. She only needed a sense of compatibility to be able to crush her. Snake Tongue didn't need to do anything here. She could crush Snake Tongue. Snake Tongue still displayed a temperate attitude within the bathroom environment. Even though she was helping Luo Nan take a bath, she still wore a kimono. Her entire body was dressed in a strict manner. She didn't care if the steam in the bathroom made her clothes or hair wet. Water droplets condensed from steam slid down the surface of the kimono, the inner lining, the cheeks, and the neck, accentuating the delicate and white skin. On top of the neat bun, there was a thin layer of water, which gave it a porcelain-like enamel effect. Such a scene had already entered the category of art. Though a portion of the reality had been erased, wasn't this the sort of thing a youngster of Luo Nan's age liked? This was Lu Chen King Edge out. In this sort of environment, she intentionally or unintentionally used the contrast between intimate contact and formal attire to carry out some sort of hint. She probed Luo Nan's reactions and inclinations. Don't ask Yin Lu how she knew. The reality was that Luo Nan didn't express anything from beginning to end. Yet he didn't refuse such probing. He seemed to be enjoying it confidently and confidently. If it was a normal man, Yin Lu wouldn't have considered the obstacles of arrogance or modesty. But past experiences always proved that when she began to consider how to take the next step, this young man's state of mind had already entered an irrelevant and unconventional level of thinking. Unable to understand his thoughts, unable to feel his pulse, forever passive, unable to keep up. For a personal secretary who was motivated, facing such a boss was really stressful. Yin Lu was even thinking about studying the persona psychological analysis file a few more times to see if she could find any clues. According to the usual procedure, there should be a follow-up update to this set of information. If she really wanted to renew it. Yin Lu took a small breath and the slightly choking water flowed out from her nose and throat. However, the heat still seeped into her internal organs, bringing an even heavier dampness and dryness. Sweat dripped down from her temples, sliding across her cheeks and onto her collarbone before sliding down. Her body was extremely greasy. The sound of water splashing in the room was extremely monotonous and noisy. It was truly unbearable. For an instant, she even wanted to push Snake Tongue, who was putting on an act, into the pool. She wanted to see what Snake Tongue would do when the time came. The sunlight nightmare. Pretty much everyone has a share. Yes. Yin Lu suddenly came back to herself and responded instinctively. She heard Luo Nan's muffled voice pass through the mist. He was indeed speaking to her. It mainly targets the turbid flow of the emotions and desires of living beings. There are many hidden stimuli, and it is somewhat related to the nature of the blood flame order's power. The abyssal region configuration isn't directly impacted, but the feedback from the masses will carry a bit, creating an indirect effect. Here it comes again. Yin Lu didn't know what expression she should use to face him. Her long years as a secretary had given her sufficiently excellent instincts. She immediately took the opportunity to take 2 steps forward. She ignored the wet ground and knelt down close to Snake Tongue. She pressed her knees to the ground and lowered her head to listen carefully. Yes. Please guide me, mister. Snake Tongue thoughtfully stopped watering at this time. She knelt upright to the side and served Luo Nan, causing the bathroom to become much quieter. Luo Nan's voice was still muffled, and it mixed together with the slightly undulating sound of the water. The lowest level of the magma lake is now equivalent to adding something. It will gain quite a bit of benefit for a short period of time. You can use it. However, pay attention to guiding and dispersing it. Don't let it flood your mind and explode your negative emotions. Yin Lu subconsciously responded, yes. But in the blink of an eye, Her final words were stuck in her throat. He wasn't talking about the order. He was clearly talking about herself. She stood to the side, her emotions surging up and down. They actually didn't escape Luo Nan's eyes. It was hard for anyone to avoid palpitations and fear from being exposed like this. Her heart skipped a beat, but the compensating emotions that came surging up were unexpectedly peaceful. They were even mixed with a marvelous feeling of excitement. Yes. She and the Blood Flame Order were under Luo Nan's control for a long time. They were cowering under his inconceivable might. She was able to attract Luo Nan's attention. This proved that she possessed a certain position and meaning in Luo Nan's heart. She was quite lucky. Besides, what was so strange about having her thoughts seen through? Several months ago, when she was communicating with Luo Nan through Fei Jin, hadn't she already been pierced through by this sharp edge? Also, she had experienced the mystical feeling of fighting across space with a true god and the others. Shouldn't the true meaning of God's understand be like this? Yin Li's other knee touched the ground. She allowed the overflowing pool water to seep into her stockings. She lowered her head deeply. I understand what you mean, sir. I will immediately go and make arrangements for T-City. Her voice was cut off again. This was because there was only a distance of half an arm between Yin Lu and Luo Nan. She could clearly feel the warmth of Luo Nan's body. She could hear his calm and drawn-out breathing. She could also hear his words that were close to a whisper. The power of chaos is still power. It's a waste to directly offset it. It's very economical to use certain rules to restrain and utilize it. It's very economical. The Blood Flame Order has already walked this path, but Mrs. Halder has walked even further. Since you have a foundation, you should use it. Think more and ponder more. Yinlu didn't quite understand. She could only respond with another, yes. She prepared to ask Mrs. Halder for guidance later. Also, this place is a bit closer to point B. Let's drive there. Sir, you want to go to the island? Yinlu had already begun to adapt to Luo Nan's leaping thoughts. She quickly reacted. The so-called point B was none other than Claw Island, the shooting range where Luo Nan practiced his exoskeleton control a few days ago. She was a bit hesitant. Sir, your current body. Just prepare a wheelchair. It's fine if you don't have one. Yes. The boss made a decision. Agreeing to it first was definitely the right thing to do. Then she heard Luo Nan continue to list out his request. I need around half a ton of consumables. Yinlu quickly did some mental calculations and responded, the island has enough in stock. However, I'll still need to transfer some to be absolutely safe. Luo Nan didn't say anything else. Yinlu received the order, and her entire being was brimming with energy. She was no longer entangled in trivial matters. She quickly got up and left the bathroom. Right now, only Luo Nan and Snake Tongue were left in the bathroom. Snake Tongue adjusted her kneeling posture. She also used this opportunity to quietly adjust the rhythm of her breathing. She slowly entered the service station. This time, she was prepared to do something different. She heard Luo Nan murmur at this time. Just a bit more. There's also you. Snake Tongue. Snake Tongue originally wanted to maintain the persona of a person of few words, but now that she was called out, she could only respond in a low voice. Your Excellency? Who knew that Luo Nan wouldn't speak again? Snake Tongue couldn't check his pulse, but she had to speak no matter what at this time. Your Excellency. Do you want me to give you a massage? Luo Nan still didn't speak. His eyes were still closed, but his chest rose and fell slightly. It seemed that he had fallen asleep amidst the dense steam. Snake Tongue could only assume that he had agreed. She dipped her hand into the pool of soup for a while, then stuck close to the surface of the water. She slowly moved up from Luo Nan's chest and ribs, using the warmth of her palm and fingers on his body. Right now, Luo Nan's skin was dark red from being soaked in the pool of soup. However, what was even more eye-catching were the crisscrossed bruises of green and purple. These were just the surface. There were some areas where Snake Tongue's fingertips streaked across. What should have been the taut skin of a young man was soft and collapsed. It was as if the skin had completely lost its elasticity. And so, Snake Tongue knew that Luo Nan's inexplicable injuries were far more serious than what was visible to the naked eye. Did he fight a great enemy through the air? Did something go wrong with his cultivation? Or did he delay the eruption of internal injuries from his battle with Gong Qi? A few speculations flashed through her mind. The rhythm of Snake Tongue's massage wasn't affected in the slightest. Only her fingertips became sharper. They alternated between the intact and the damaged body. She didn't need to deliberately mull over it. The knowledge accumulated from her many years of cultivation formed a rather precise image of the human body in her mind. Where it was tough and where it was weak, she could see it with a single glance. Chapter 808. Luonan really did seem to have fallen asleep. His breathing grew longer and longer. Snake Tongue slightly straightened her waist, letting the back of Luonan's head rest against her chest. Her fingers moved to Luonan's temples, gently rubbing them. From Snake Tongue's perspective, the sleeping Luonan completely exposed the face of a young man. The slight swelling caused by his injuries dispelled the only sense of seriousness that came from his habitual frown. Such a young man was 16 or 17 years old. He hadn't even passed puberty, but he was already one of the strongest people in the world. He possessed the mighty power of a god, and he firmly grasped her fate of life and death. But right now, this young man's mind was hazy. He had hidden injuries all over. It seemed that all she needed to do was exert a bit of force with her 2 fingers. Some restless flames were instantly frozen by ice-cold reason. But Snake Tongue's fingers still showed some stiffness. Even in the hot and humid bathroom, cold air seeped out of her fingertips. Luonan's eyelids trembled slightly at this time. Then he slowly opened his eyes, but his gaze was unfocused. It was as if he was cast into an unknown dimension. Snake Tongue's rubbing movements were nearly frozen to death. Her long years of acting had tempered her top-notch acting skills, as well as her powerful control and expressive ability. This helped her maintain her current persona of a perfect servant, allowing everything to continue according to normal logic. Snake Tongue was confident in her acting skills. She could vividly play any role in the world, and she could play the perfect version of herself. The problem was that even the world's top acting skills were unable to control the thoughts that flashed through one's mind. Unfortunately, the person in her embrace possessed the divine power to point directly at one's heart. A second later, or perhaps longer, Luonan's voice rang out. Your talent in cultivation is better than Yin Li's. You're better than many people. Much better. I already knew this back at Ocean Sky Cloud City. Snake Tongue's rubbing movements finally froze. She held her breath. I just had a concept regarding coupling. I recklessly experimented with it, and you were able to sort out a logical outline. You're truly amazing. Luonan was undoubtedly reminiscing. He was reminiscing about his first encounter with Snake Tongue several months ago in Xia City. Snake Tongue didn't know why, but this was absolutely not what she wanted. The problem was that she couldn't even control her own thoughts, let alone block Luonan's thoughts. Back then, you didn't call me Lord. You called me... What? Lord Luo. There were a million things in Snake Tongue's heart that she didn't want to say, but in the end, she could only obediently spit out the answer. Her voice was unprecedentedly hoarse. Luonan was still leaning in her embrace. His eyes were unfocused, and his murmur sounded like he was talking in his sleep. But when it fell into Snake Tongue's mind, it was like thunder rolling from the depths of the clouds. So we started off as enemies. You, puppeteer, and that tank-destroyed gear, destroyed the legacy of my mother's designs. And I threw you into the cloud world. There you were enslaved by Gong Qi, and you slowly tasted the taste of weakness and death. Snake Tongue's body began to tremble uncontrollably. At the same time, an unfathomable fear expanded in his body. It was like the surging clouds in the world of clouds. It carried a blood-colored poisonous light as it corroded his internal organs, limbs, and bones. No, she didn't want to go back to that state. Never. But what could she do? As a newly attached believer, or rather, a captive, what should she do? What could she do? All external decorations were meaningless. The more perfect the acting, the weaker the heart. Luonan's whisper continued to linger beside her ear. You're very chaotic. A terrible starting point. A terrible process. And a seemingly acceptable result, yet it's still an extremely terrible result. You've survived, but you didn't survive in the way you wanted. You're unyielding. You must be very unwilling. Right now, it was impossible for Snake Tongue to maintain her current posture. She used all of her strength to maintain the rhythm of her movements. She carefully leaned Luo Nan's body against the edge of the pool, and she broke away from him. She retreated, then she knelt on the ground. Her forehead made contact with the wet floor. She didn't open her mouth again because it would be wrong no matter what she said. She could only use this method to display her own humbleness and submission. Luo Nan's murmur continued to enter her ears amidst the hot and humid steam. It seemed that he was a bit tired from speaking, and his voice became even weaker and more vague. Your method is superior to Yin Li's. Etiquette is an external order. It can restrain emotions, but it doesn't go as far as to greatly neutralize the true strength in the heart. There has always been a flame burning in the bottom of your heart. The stricter the etiquette, the more intense the flame. This is very good. There was an instant when Snake Tongue's entire body went numb from top to bottom. It was as if she had lost all perception of her body. Only the heat and burn that burst forth from her chest was so clear and real. It was also at this moment that Snake Tongue tasted the flavor within. It was fear. It was resentment. It was hatred. It was restlessness. It was unwillingness. It was everything she was unable to dispel in this lowly situation. It accumulated and coiled to the point of smoldering poisonous flames. It was like the burning coal seams underground or the roaring magma. It smelted her soul, causing it to transform into an appearance that she herself was unable to distinguish. But the important point was that such a warped and blazing soul gushed out a power that even Snake Tongue herself was unable to control. Yet it was grasped by a peerlessly powerful hand from outside, stroking and toying with. A deep despair covered her nose and mouth, suffocating her. Luo Nan's voice dispersed amidst the steam. There were practically no fluctuations in his tone. He spoke in a flat and straightforward manner, describing the facts. You are polite, temperate, and obedient. You use etiquette to regulate and sublimate them. You are close to pious. The word, pious, is very good. This form is also very good. However, your self-awareness isn't clear enough. You said it yourself. The orders here in Ban City all know what the god they worship is. Therefore, there isn't much piousness to speak of. I've also read a few similar books and articles. As long as a god is worshipped, the distance between the two sides must be pulled apart. It's best if the believers are ignorant. Piety is an unequal mental state. In this era, especially the ability users of this era, being able to be pious to certain concepts, certain abstract supernatural powers is already the limit. It's too hard for them to treat the god by their side like this. Moreover, I'm far from being considered a... Then there was a knock on the door at this time. Inla reminded him from outside the door. Mister, everything is ready. Luo Nan's train of thought was interrupted, but he didn't mind. He went, oh, then it's fine to stop here. Inla thought that Luo Nan had finished his bath, so she pushed open the door and entered. She had prepared a wheelchair outside the door. However, she was stupefied when she saw the situation in the room. Her gaze turned to Snake Tongue, who was lying on the ground. She resisted her curiosity and listened to Luo Nan's instructions. Luo Nan used his soul strength to drive his body and stood up from the hot spring. Let's go. Hurry up and tidy up your body. Inlu rushed forward to support him. Snake Tongue, who was lying on the floor, was stunned for 2 seconds before she absent-mindedly got up. She completely followed her instincts and did what she had been doing before. It seemed that she would continue doing in the future. Before today, Luo Nan had never encountered such a situation. He had bared his body in front of 2 beautiful women. He was like the slave masters of ancient times, enjoying meticulous service down to his hair. However, the speed at which he entered the state exceeded his expectations. There was still some awkwardness and deliberate restraint before the bath, but now it had already turned into nothingness. Of course, he had never seriously experienced anything. Most of Luo Nan's energy was placed on the sunlight nightmare, the source of this phenomenon, the abyss world, and the intermediate process of the evolution of the two. He had observed the abyss world and even experienced the effects of the backlash. Right now, his brain had quite a few bursts of inspiration. Unfortunately, none of them matured. Once he entered the practical domain, he would more or less be lacking. And these were just insignificant sprays and droplets of the torrential flood of information. There were many more valuable things. They were all buried in the filtering nets of the soul cloak and the altar's spiderweb. It was hard to find a trace of them. If he forcibly searched, his consciousness would unconsciously move toward the abyss world. He would feel the gravitational effect. Luo Nan didn't know the gravity of the situation. He didn't have the courage to do another wave in a short amount of time. Therefore, he cast his gaze toward the outside world. The other side of the Pacific Ocean was the area that suffered the most from the Sunlight Nightmare's attack. However, Luo Nan had already observed that the attack was too tyrannical. The effects and feedback were rather monotonous. On the other side of the old continent, the effects were incorporeal and ever-changing. There was great value in observation and research. Yin Lu and Snake Tongue were both targets of his observation. As for the results of the observation, there weren't any surprises on Yin Lu. Her years as a secretary had made her sharp and tactful, so she naturally tended to treat her boss as the key. Even if there were some stimuli, she would swiftly dissolve them without any qualitative changes. On the other hand, Snake Tongue, a beautiful and obedient woman on the surface, hid an almost instinctive untamed strength in her heart. The exuberant emotions that were suppressed in the deepest part of his heart, and the calmness and rationality that had been polished for years were a special portrayal of the blend of chaos and order. If one were to look at it with colored glasses, they would even vaguely see the checks and balances between sun and hell. Something as big as the Sunlight Nightmare had finally left some traces in this world. That was good. Luo Nan decided not to provoke Snake Tongue for now. Snake Tongue needed to digest the emotional impact she had revealed. He also needed to make further observations and interpretations. Don't look at how his previous psychological analysis was straightforward and incisive, hitting the nail on the head. Luo Nan still had a smattering of knowledge when it came to the deepest parts of human psychology and emotions. He always felt that he was lacking a bit. He was separated by a layer. He was unable to touch it. The more it was like this, the more he couldn't let go of a special case like Snake Tongue. Wasn't this a bit excessive? But among the pile of believers, there was only one example of an enemy transforming into a believer, Snake Tongue. For such a dangerous experiment with unpredictable consequences, why didn't he look for her? Luo Nan's mind spun 2 more times. The more he spun, the more he felt that it was natural and right. Oh, the more he spun, the more inexplicably delighted he felt. How should he refer to it? The exquisite and treacherous changes that came from the bottom of his heart troubled Luo Nan a bit. Perhaps he needed to read a few related monographs or consult a veteran like Mr. Bai. Chapter 809. Under the service of the 2 beautiful women, Luo Nan quickly took care of his appearance. He wore a bathrobe and sat in a wheelchair. Yin Lu pushed him out of the bathroom. Actually, the wheelchair was electric, but Yin Lu was willing to push him, so Luo Nan let her. Yin Lu seized the time to give a more detailed report after arriving in a domain that was more suitable for her. The yacht will arrive at the pier of Claw Island in approximately 7 minutes. Mister, do you want to go directly to the island? Yes. Then let us help you change your clothes, mister. Oh, no need. In any case, we probably won't be able to stay. Just go directly. Yes. Yin Lu was used to these kinds of instructions. Plus, she felt that the temperature of Ban City in May was acceptable, so she didn't say anything more. As for Snake Tongue, she was even more silent than before. The kimono on her body was half wet and a bit messy, but she didn't cut a sorry figure. At least she didn't look that way on the surface. She followed the style of a traditional Ban City woman. She walked forward with small steps, reserved and humble. Who could know that there was a ball of poisonous fire rolling in her heart, but it was sealed in the ice of reason, burning in despair. Even though Luo Nan was the one who set the question, he was unable to detect any clues from Snake Tongue's tranquil expression just by looking at her from the outside. In an extremely short amount of time, Snake Tongue had already grasped the basics of losing control of her emotions. She suppressed them so that they wouldn't interfere with her reason. At the same time, she continued to provide a stimulating power. Of course, as Snake Tongue completed all of this, the altar spiderweb constructed an even more complex and profound control structure in her mind. Not only did Luo Nan's control over her not weaken, it actually increased. This can be considered my work, right? Truly amazing. Luonan didn't know if he was praising Snake Tongue or praising himself. He tilted his head to size up Snake Tongue, but in the end, he adhered to his previous plan. He didn't stimulate her further. The three entered the elevator and went to the upper deck. Inla received a phone call in the elevator. It came from the cockpit of the yacht. She was a bit surprised and hung up after a few words. She leaned over and reported to Luonan, "Mister, there are surveillance planes operating in the airspace surrounding Claw Island. They belong to the Coastal Defense Forces of Ban City. They just asked for the identification number of our yacht. It seems that they are carrying out a search mission. They also informed us that if necessary, they will board the ship for inspection. Please cooperate." Coastal defense? Luonan scanned the area with his telepathic thoughts, and he more or less understood the surrounding environment. It was already late at night in Ban City. There were many clouds and stars, and the surface of the lake was dark and gloomy. It was relatively quiet. Within a radius of 10 kilometers, apart from the low hum of the yacht's motor, there were only two unnatural noises: a cruising aircraft 700 meters above the side, and a small submarine 50 meters below the surface of the lake, 7 kilometers away in a straight line. If one were to expand the scope a bit, there would be approximately 100 or so people in the northern mountain lake region. They were all military personnel armed with real guns and ammunition. They were equipped with 2 units of deep blue walkers, and they were seething with murderous intent. It has nothing to do with us. Luonan didn't discover any experts among the military personnel. He didn't discover any targeted hostility. Finding trouble with him with this kind of equipment was simply a joke. It would be too exaggerated to say that this was a probe. Inla thought so too. Maybe they're searching for fugitives. The northwest of Beishan Lake was also considered a wilderness area. There were mountains everywhere, and the terrain and people were equally complicated. In this case, it was normal for the military to intervene without the Metropolitan Police Department's permission. They can indeed board the ship for inspection. It's an official act, so it's hard for us to refuse. But it's nothing. I personally entered the country normally. Snake Tongue's identity can withstand inspection. The yacht's procedures are complete. We signed a temporary lease agreement with the Explorer Society of Ban City over at Claw Island. As for you, sir, even if you were to stand in front of them, they might not be able to discover you. What was up with Yin Li's confidence? Was she trying to flatter him? Luonan was amused by her. Yin Lu took the opportunity to suggest, "Sir, we can block most reconnaissance methods on the ship. But if we board the island now, we will be exposed to the enemy's surveillance. Shouldn't we wait a bit?" Wait. Luonan frowned. He wasn't willing to disrupt his plans, but then again, the entire day of competing with the Abyss world seemed to be outside of his plans. "Your Excellency can also help the military speed up their progress." Snake Tongue spoke unhurriedly. She lowered her eyes and brows when Luonan shifted his gaze over. It seemed that the words just now had nothing to do with her. Snake Tongue's current mental state was very subtle. It seemed that she had broken through something, but she was obediently restrained. Luonan's interest in this aspect far exceeded that of the military search and capture operation. Oh, Snake Tongue's suggestion was indeed clever. If it really was an extremely vicious criminal, Luonan didn't mind helping the military out. Everyone would disperse sooner, and their hearts would be clean. Luonan's mind had already circled North Mountain Lake 80 to 100 times as he thought this. However, the latest news traveled a bit faster than his thoughts. Inla received the latest news. It was hard for her to conceal her bewilderment. "Sir, the military has informed us that they are no longer boarding the ship for inspection." Ha! It seems that the mission has ended. They've already withdrawn. Luonan asked curiously, "Did they catch the criminal?" This. Luonan's curiosity was piqued during the time Inlu was stuck. His mental senses had already covered the entirety of Ban City, and he had increased his resolution by a large margin. His perceptual strength was like an enormous fishing net being cast down at this moment. It was spread out like a cloud of smoke, and when it was drawn in, it grabbed an ocean's worth of information. The information covered multiple dimensions of the mental and material planes. The amount of information he received in an instant was enormous. But compared to the trillions of fragments in the mist labyrinth, the flow of information originating from the real world and the rules of society was simply smooth and orderly. He swallowed it in a single gulp, and it was digested in the blink of an eye. Cough. This was an exaggerated description. Luo Nan wasn't stupid enough to search and analyze item by item. He just grabbed a high-resolution comparison photo of the beginning of the term and the end of the term. After a slight comparison, there was a clear difference between chaos and order. 10 seconds ago, a fire, 2 to 3 violent crimes, 5 car accidents, over 100 quarrels, nearly 1,000 noises, and several tens of thousands of drunkards had occurred in the surroundings of Ban City. There were no abnormalities in all of this. The residual energy that caused injuries and death was scattered all over the coast. There was a location on the northern shore of North Mountain Lake, and a dozen locations deep in the mountains. Among them, there were 3 locations that involved military weaponry. There were 2 locations on the coast, and there was one on the northern shore. This was probably the result of the military's efforts. Luo Nan didn't possess the ability to rewind time, but he was able to perform positioning and analysis from the vibrations of the particles in the atmosphere and the eruption of emotions in the sea of consciousness. The amount of information involved in such a method was quite astonishing. But Luo Nan wanted to say that any information that could be organized and explained wasn't a problem at all. Luo Nan's interest was piqued, and he thoroughly understood the situation. Yinlu wasn't idle either. She made a few phone calls and obtained an answer. She hesitated for a moment before moving closer to Luo Nan. "Mister, I've obtained information from another channel. The military's operation is public. It said that they were hunting down an important figure of an illegal order. The operation has already ended. There's an illegal order in Ban City?" Luo Nan couldn't help but chuckle twice. He spoke of the results of his observations in passing. 2 are dead, and 1 is captured. Yinlu did her best to maintain a matter-of-fact attitude. She didn't want to be so useless. But after digging out the follow-up information, she really didn't feel good in her heart. According to the military's report, that illegal order is the Soul Order. Soul Order. Luo Nan felt that the name sounded familiar, but he didn't react in time. It wasn't until he sensed Yinlu's awkward mood that he suddenly realized something. The Soul Order. The one that killed Black Wolf. Yes. Yinlu couldn't say anything more. This was because she was one of the cold spectators when Black Wolf was killed. Luo Nan never had any formal contact with the Soul Order, but they had bad intentions towards him. Last year, not long after Luo Nan rose to prominence due to the cage theory, this order secretly executed a scheme. They used the doctrine of the immortal soul to send out a character called Fantasy Fire to lure and kill Black Wolf, a member of the Xia City branch's operations team. Fantasy Fire used a bizarre possession technique to occupy Black Wolf's body. They attempted to break into Luo Nan's circle of friends and conspire against him. Their methods were extremely covert. The Xia City branch, including Luo Nan, were all kept in the dark. However, perhaps there was a need for cooperation, but Fantasy Fire's luring and possession operation against Black Wolf turned into a business demonstration. The middleman was the LCRF Xia City manager, Sun Jiari. The client was the Blood Flame Order. Yinlu was the one present at the time. It wasn't a big deal at first, but everyone present at the time, including Yinlu herself, never expected that she, Mrs. Halder, and even the entire Blood Flame Order would completely lean towards Luo Nan in a few short days. In this way, the secret became a joke. The incident came inexplicably and left abruptly. Fantasy Fire, who had taken over Black Wolf's body, was personally captured by Ouyang Chen. However, Fantasy Fire's soul was in a special state. His soul was completely extinguished the moment he was stimulated intensely. He didn't leave any clues behind. Sun Jiari was controlled by the Xia City branch. She confessed to this matter without reservation, but she didn't reveal any valuable information to the Soul Order. She was only a middleman, and her identity was special. The LCRF and headquarters exerted quite a bit of pressure on her. She was currently under surveillance, and there was no further news for the time being. The Soul Order's conspiracy came to a screeching halt in Xia City. The Xia City branch informed the various powers of the inner world of the Soul Order's information and methods. It would have been better if they hadn't informed the Soul Order. Once the news got out, all sides made a summary and analysis, and the situation suddenly escalated. It turned out that Luo Nan wasn't the only target of the Soul Order. Many powerful and famous ability users of the inner world had become their targets. Their methods were very similar. They all attacked the outside first, and then they gradually infiltrated. In this way, there were nearly 100 innocent victims, not to mention the main target. Their goals were vague. Their motives were unclear. They attacked fiercely right from the start. This sort of order was an illegal organization. Overnight, this pheasant order, which didn't have much of a reputation, became the target of everyone's curses. Especially at the beginning of the year, they were simply the public enemy of the world. Regardless of whether it was the inner world or the secular world, news about them repeatedly appeared in the newspapers. Luo Nan paid attention to them for a few days at first, but later, he threw himself wholeheartedly into the study and research of configuration. He pondered over how to kill Gong Qi with a single thought, and he soon became desensitized. He was quite surprised when he heard the news today. They haven't been exterminated yet? The military has taken over handling it. I think that there are very few ability users left. Perhaps they're the remnants. Forget it. I don't care about them. Luo Nan had no interest in delving into the matters that had already been determined. The yacht was already docked at Claw Island's pier. He had more pressing matters to attend to. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.